Chapter 386. Aren't you high elves so arrogant? Aren't you elves cold and aloof, like you're the best in the world and everyone owes you money? For Aurelia's sake, I've come all the way here, but I've been left outside your borders to eat dust. This feels so good. All right. You don't listen. You don't understand. You know but don't do it. You can't do it well. I sent you reinforcements, but you don't use them. You have to use your precious troops to send food. Are you King Sun King and the Silver Moon Council courting death? As a transmigrator, Xueqi didn't have much resentment towards the High Elves. But when Xueqi truly experienced the arrogant and domineering temperament of the High Elves, Xueqi said, I don't want to serve you anymore. Now that Xueqi said, I'm not free, the High Elves were furious. I'm finally willing to serve you with the highest treatment, and you're saying you're not free. This time, even Prince Xueqi's eyelids twitched a few times. If he was just putting on airs, Xueqi was undoubtedly going overboard. Of course, Xueqi wasn't that stupid. His reason was even more dignified. In the mirror image, Xueqi had a regretful look on his face. Sorry, I'm sorry. I originally planned to help you deal with the main force of the great tribal chief, but I saw that Xueqi didn't seem to need support. On the other side, King Menethil urged me more than 10 times to help deal with the tribal division that was causing destruction near Darroshire. So, I transferred the 30,000-strong army away. With that, Xueqi turned the camera to show the scene of a fierce battle all over the mountains and plains. It wasn't actually a fierce battle. The elves noticed that the humans had gained the absolute upper hand. The human soldiers were methodically surrounding and annihilating the tribes. Considering that Xueqi was the deputy commander of the alliance, it was completely reasonable for him to deal with the tribes in the territories of the alliance first. Who told the High Elves not to join the alliance? At this moment, all the counselors felt so regretful that their intestines turned green. Countless resentful gazes turned towards the Silver Moon Counselor Dalcan, who had given the 8 countries a hard time. Everyone knew that Xueqi was trying to get back at him. He was forcing the High Elves to choose between pride and riches. In fact, there wasn't much to choose from. Moral integrity was something that could easily be lost after it had been lost once. 2,800 years ago, the elves sought help from the humans and had no choice but to teach them magic in exchange for the human support. 2,800 years later, the elves would only lose their moral integrity once more. Now that the Silver Moon Council had admitted defeat, the Sun King would not exterminate the Silver Moon Council when they were in urgent need of manpower in front of the enemy. Even if they were the worst political enemies, their power as archmages would still come in handy when the enemy was at the gates. The Sun King winked at his son. That's immediately stepped forward. Xueqi, the High Elves need your help. Could I trouble you to come to Silver Moon City as soon as possible? As he said this, that's looked at Aurelia, who was standing at the end of the hall. The eyes of this gentle and elegant prince were full of pleading. He was going to play the emotional card. If it were someone else, Aurelia would definitely not care. But not that's. Back then, Aurelia had given Xueqi the mage apprentice's notebook that belonged to that's. She had been sentenced to 3 months because of that's pleading. Otherwise, with the political influence of the Windrunner family, she would have been sentenced to 1 year at best, or 3 years in prison at worst. Aurelia's mouth moved slightly, and a breeze quietly drifted to Elucia's ear. Elucia immediately understood. She did not do anything but let the camera shine on Aurelia. Xueqi understood on the spot. All right, when I've dealt with the leader of this division, I'll come over as soon as possible. When Xueqi said this, the head of the leader of this division, General Nogjar, was right next to Xueqi's hand. In the original trajectory of history, if Nogjar had been allowed to continue growing, perhaps he would have become a famous tribal hero. Unfortunately, his opponent was Xueqi. After learning that the annihilation of Hindlands had ended, Xueqi immediately left an empty camp with less than 300 people outside the Elven Kingdom's border. The main force immediately turned around and joined up with Seamus' division. Cudrin Wildhammer was also very generous. Ever since the pinnacle battle at the wine table, Cudrin personally brought the entire Griffin Knight regiment. The Air Force regiment seemed to be a little smaller in terms of numbers, with only 1,000 riders. But considering the terrifying combat power of an adult griffin that could easily take out 20 infantrymen without panting, a Griffin Knight regiment was actually no less than the combat power of 50,000 people. Apart from that, Qudran also supported a heavy infantry regiment of 3,000 people from the Eagle Nest Mountain. This time, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Qudran had emptied his entire base. Flying in the sky and blocking on the ground, the annihilation of this dwarven division was also reasonable. Moreover, Xueqi knew that Nogjar was ferocious, so he directly formed a team and killed this horde quasi-hero. Moreover, Gavin Rad, Reginald, Qudran, and Xueqi, the four of them together, no matter how ferocious Nogjar was, he could only die in frustration. In fact, during the magic transmission, Xueqi even cheated. The background of the battle that the elves saw was actually a video recorded by Xueqi. The 60,000 troops were already stationed outside the Elven Kingdom's border. Chapter 387. It was a pity that their prince had been beaten like a dog by the tribe in the first battle. Even though the royal family and the Silver Moon Council spared no effort in publicizing Xueqi's glorious achievements, every elf with a brain knew that the High Elves had failed once again, and had no choice but to seek help from the humans. Rather than saying that this was a grand welcoming ceremony for a hero, it would be more accurate to say that 100,000 elves had no choice but to witness the noble High Elves being nailed to the pillar of shame once again. The only difference was that this wasn't a humiliating surrender ceremony, but a welcoming ceremony in the name of an ally. The Sun King and the Silver Moon Council only had one last fig leaf left. They had no choice but to urgently need this fig leaf. An army of 70,000 had been destroyed, and 90% of their land had fallen. Even the most optimistic elves did not dare to hope that the High Elves could survive this crisis alone. The panicking citizens needed confidence. The despairing and suffering soldiers needed hope. These were all things that the Sun King and the Silver Moon Council could not give to their citizens and soldiers. Xueqi, the most powerful orc killer in Azeroth's history, the culprit behind the deaths of 500,000 orcs. His appearance was undoubtedly a boost to the morale of the Kuel Salis elves, who were on the brink of hell. Hence, Xueqi's arrival had undoubtedly left the elves in a dilemma. Happiness, humiliation, unease, warmth. All sorts of emotions were running through them. At 10 in the morning, the vast Traveler's Square was already tightly surrounded by elven commoners. When their king and parliament couldn't provide them with a sense of security, it was part of their survival instinct to look for a new life-saving straw. If something happened to Xueqi and he could not come, or if the teleportation portal was disrupted, causing the promised reinforcements to not be able to come, the elven citizens would undoubtedly sink into a deeper despair and fear. Fortunately, Xueqi did not stand them up. At 10 sharp, in the middle of the square, a huge circular teleportation portal that was 5 stories tall opened. Under the illumination of the sparkling arcane energy, 10 Morningstar elven wizards in uniform rapidly helped to stabilize the portal. Under the gaze of 100,000 pairs of eyes, a rare sight in silvery moon appeared on the other side of the portal, followed by the orderly and rhythmic sound of hooves. Huge and pure white warhorses seemed to be performing dressage, taking rhythmic steps as they stepped out of the portal. The first thing that entered the elven citizens' sight were 12 human knights in shining armor. It was clearly the Storm Kingdom's knight armor with a silver base and blue edges. Unexpectedly, the flags they held in their hands were in a mess, with all kinds of colors. At first, some ignorant citizens sneered softly. 2 seconds later, they exclaimed from the bottom of their hearts. The war flags were the war flags of the tribes. One of the war flags had the same symbol as the one used to besiege Silver Moon City. It was the war flag of the Blackrock tribe. Not only were there flags, but there were also a dozen huge orc heads frozen with ice magic. Banners written in the elven language were inserted into the ice, announcing the identities of these heads. Surprisingly, each of these heads belonged to a tribal chief. Among them, the most eye-catching were the words head of the great tribal chief Black Hand. That's right. That's right. These Alliance Knights were displaying the Alliance's achievements to the elves with the attitude of victors. They were displaying Duke's great achievements. Behind the 12 knights were the 12 Earth Wizards. As soon as they appeared, they lined up neatly on both sides, bowing at a 45-degree angle as they awaited the arrival of the most important person. Finally, there was a loud sound in the sky, and Xueqi made a dazzling appearance. Accompanied by the deafening thunder, Xueqi appeared in the teleportation portal, enveloped by a tornado formed from 5 different elements. A wriggling chain of lightning. A violently spinning gale shield. An incomparably scorching snake of flames. A bone-chilling barrier of ice. An incomparably mysterious light of arcane magic. 5 different types of power could actually blend together harmoniously, turning into 12 spinning elemental energy balls that floated above Xueqi's head. Xueqi's move directly defeated Prince Kale, who always had 3 arcane energy balls floating above his head. In fact, it was not just Kale Acting Chairman Morlenz, who had been waiting at the side, also had an awkward expression on his face. Xueqi's people were invited by the Silver Moon Council on their knees. Even if the other party was obviously trying to humiliate them, the Silver Moon Council could only swallow it. Morlenz pretended not to see anything, and put on a warm face as he followed Elugia to welcome him. "Welcome, Teacher Xueqi. Xueqi, you're here. My father is already waiting for you. I am Acting Chairman Morlenz. I represent the Silver Moon Council in welcoming you, Your Excellency Grand Duke Marcus." 3 people, 3 different forms of address, but it did not seem out of place on this occasion. Xueqi nodded lightly to Elugia, and the eldest daughter of the Bearer family obediently stood behind Xueqi. Then Prince Kale, that's on the left, and Chairman Morlenz on the right. The 2 incomparably noble elves led Xueqi on the red carpet towards the hall where the Silver Moon Council was located. The horn sounded to welcome the guests, and thunderous applause sounded, accompanied by cheers that reached the sky. Countless petals were scattered by beautiful elven girls from the balconies of the tall buildings on both sides of the road onto the red carpet. "Welcome, the hero of mankind. Long live the beast-man killer Xueqi. Qul Salis is counting on you. Marcus." No matter how much of the welcome was sincere, at least at this moment, Xueqi received the treatment he deserved. The arrogance of the high elves that had lingered in Silver Moon City for thousands of years seemed to have transformed into the red carpet used to welcome guests, and was ruthlessly stepped on by Xueqi. The corner of Xueqi's mouth curved into a sinister smile. "Silver Moon City, here I come, as the savior of the world. If you are willing to put down your pride, then I don't mind giving you some pointers. If you are so stubborn, then don't blame me for letting you die." Various aspects of the history of the world of Azeroth appeared in Xueqi's mind. It could be said that since the first opening of the Dark Portal, the history of the entire world was a history of war between the Alliance and the Horde. There might be a short period of peace, but most of the time it was a state of war. Only when a stronger enemy attacked, and when they could not fight against the foreign enemy alone, would these mortal enemies quickly resolve their conflict and turn to an alliance. In history, Orgrim's troops only circled the Long Song Forest once, and then left contentedly after setting up the Storm Altar, leaving the suffering trolls to deal with the elves alone. Now, history had changed greatly. Without a doubt, the person who now controlled the fate of the High Elves was Xueqi. Walking on the red carpet, Xueqi clearly did not have a noble crown on his head. However, in the eyes of the elves, Xueqi was without a doubt an uncrowned king. Chapter 388. The Uncrowned King. It sounded nice, but most people would think that it was useless to not be a king. In fact, this majority was wrong. No one knew better than Xueqi, who was a transmigrator. Without the support of power, the title of king was even more meaningless than an empty title. If the orcs and trolls from the First and Second Wars were considered mortals, then the Third War at the Dark Portal would start. In that case, starting from the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, things like resurrection from the dead, the Calamity Army formed from the undead, dragons, elemental lords, ancient gods. When a large number of ordinary people saw these things that would make them piss their pants, everyone would know that any country that didn't have enough power to support it was nothing more than child's play. Only power. Only then would Xueqi be able to stand at the peak of the world's nations. Now, Xueqi stood there, his formless power like a storm, easily sweeping through the entire Traveler's Square. Tens of thousands of elves consciously formed a long line. Whether they were willing or not, they had to worship Xueqi and pray for Xueqi's salvation. It was as if a silent image was overlapping with history, just like the scene from 2,800 years ago. Accompanying the elven hero Anastrian Sunstrider into the city was the greatest emperor in human history, Thoradin the Great. Now, Anastrian had been replaced by Kale, the heroic knight king on the saddle had been replaced by the mage hero, and the leadership had changed. It was no longer the elves, but the humans. This scene made countless elves feel conflicted and sad. Xueqi walked on the red carpet, looking around from the corner of his eyes. He had to admit that the main city of the High Elves was indeed beautiful. There were beautiful sculptures and buildings everywhere. Even if a piece of a building were to be dismantled by the roadside and auctioned in the human world, it could be sold for a sky-high price. It had to be known that this was not the Silver Moon City that had been witnessed by the players in the future, the one that had been built next to the original ruins. This was the original Silvery Moon City. In terms of artistic value, it completely surpassed the 9 streets of the new city. Although New Silver Moon City was also very beautiful, compared to this beautiful ancient city with thousands of years of history, New Silver Moon City was more like a clumsy imitation. At this moment, Prince Kale, who was beside Xueqi, said softly, "Silver Moon is beautiful, right? She is the pride and greatest spiritual sustenance of the High Elves. If possible, we don't want her to be affected by the flames of war." Xueqi noticed that the prince used she to describe Silver Moon City. Just like how humans like to use women's names to describe warships. This kind of attachment to things was really characteristic of the elves. Xueqi replied, "That's exactly why I'm here." Kale, nodded and didn't say anything else. Before the negotiations reached the moment of signing, unforeseen events could still occur. The prince thought silently, as long as Xueqi doesn't ask for too much. The sound of drums and trumpets, as well as the noise, faded away with the end of the half-hour-long welcome ceremony. However, even though Xueqi's young and mysterious figure had disappeared from the entrance of the Parliament Hall, not a single elf citizen left. It was as if they were waiting for the final judgment, for the results of the negotiations. Everyone knew that the arrogance of the elves had long since angered the 7 human kingdoms and the bronze-bearded dwarves of the Cosmodan Kingdom. When the humans repeatedly asked for help, the Silver Moon Parliament had arrogantly ignored them. Now, it was the High Elves' turn to face extinction. Would the humans still be willing to lend a helping hand? None of the elves knew. In the dazzling and glorious hall, the 1024 magic lamps arranged in all directions illuminated the hall as if it was daytime. Walking in it, one couldn't see a trace of shadow, giving people a majestic feeling as if they were walking in the temple of the Sun God. The Sun King Anastrian Sunstrider, who was sitting on his throne above the 9 steps of stairs, finally stood up. He spread his arms, and his slightly aged majestic voice reverberated in the huge hall that was more than 10,000 square meters. "Welcome, the Grand Duke of Stormwind City, the Orc Killer, the hero of the humans, and the great guardian candidate, Your Excellency Duke Marcus." For a king to formally call out Xueqi's title as the most awesome was undoubtedly a huge concession. It must be known that this kind of high-hatted greeting, when uttered by a ceremonial officer, and when uttered by a king, have 2 completely different meanings. Xueqi didn't want to provoke the elves any further. He bowed slightly so that his head was in a straight line with his back. He didn't lower his head, but purely expressed his respect for his elders. "Thank you, Your Majesty, the Breaking Dawn Archmage, the Terminator of the Troll War, and the great ruler of the elves, Sun King Anastrian Sunstrider." Xueqi's words made the high-ranking elves, who had been laughing dryly, calm down a little. "Your Excellency Marcus, may I ask if I'm talking to the Grand Duke of Stormwind City now? Or the Deputy Commander of the Rotterdam Alliance?" The Sun King's words had a deeper meaning in politics. Previously, in order to avoid provoking Xueqi Salas, Xueqi could only approach the border of the elves in the name of the Grand Duke and his private army. If the high-ranking elves turned a blind eye and let Xueqi enter, they would let Xueqi stab them in the back during the first or second battle between the elves and the tribes. Then, the elves would at most think of a way to compensate Xueqi, and then join the alliance. Then the matter would be over. However, the Silver Moon Council would accuse Aurelia of having an affair with Xueqi, and forbid Xueqi from entering. All right, now that the elves' main force had been defeated, and the new soldiers had yet to be trained, they were only willing to invite Xueqi when their country was on the brink of extinction. If Xueqi insisted on holding on to this point, the elves would naturally have to continue to compensate Xueqi, who was the Grand Duke, for the damage to his heart and so on. Of course, Xueqi could do that, but he would be at a disadvantage. A smile appeared on Duke's face as he raised his hand, and a very formal document appeared in the air in front of all of the elves with the power of the arcane technique. "I, Duke Marcus, have officially obtained the absolute authorization of the Rotterdam Alliance. As the Deputy Commander of the Rotterdam Alliance, I am fully responsible for the negotiation of the Kingdom of Xueqi Salas joining the alliance. On it are the seals of the Commander-in-Chief and the kings of the member countries." Xueqi's move caught the Sun King and the Silver Moon Council off guard. No one expected Xueqi to have such a huge influence in the alliance. He actually obtained the full support of the Commander-in-Chief and 8 kings in one night. At this moment, The 8 kings were fighting bloody battles against the horde on all fronts in the world. How much trust did it take for so many crafty kings to agree to give up their power in such a short period of time? How great was Xueqi's prestige? All the elves gasped. At this moment, a herald suddenly ran in a hurry. Oh no, the tribes have broken through our regional magic defense, and they will attack the city at any time. Xueqi raised his hand, and suddenly, a flag flew out of his storage space and into Aurelia's hand. Take my flag and stick it on the city wall. Today, the chief of the tribes will naturally get lost. The elves' faces changed again. Retreat with 1 flag? Are you kidding me? Chapter 389. If someone else dared to do such a thing in front of a group of high-level elves, it would be enough to say that the high elves were a superior race and a nation of etiquette if they didn't burn him to death with magic fire on the spot. At first, the reaction of all the elves was that it was ridiculous. In other words, the humans thought that Xueqi was showing off. Not just any show-off, but a show that was courting death. A war flag could force back a horde army of 100,000? Wasn't he afraid of being struck by lightning for showing off so much? Several counselors were about to mock him, but all of them swallowed their words. Why? The name of a human. The shadow of a tree. Even if every counselor didn't like Xueqi, no one dared to deny Xueqi's achievements. There were many elves living in the human world, and the impact of the war had already spread to every country and city on the Lordaeron continent. There were a lot of orc heads on display outside more than one town. Xueqi's achievements were real. What if Xueqi's reputation was really so terrible that he could scare away the orcs with just a war flag? The elven counselors had to swallow their words and wait for the development of the situation. Xueqi looked at Aurelia. Aurelia also stared at Xueqi. This beautiful and smart elven ranger general certainly knew what Xueqi wanted. Xueqi used his wisdom to foresee a shameless and despicable power struggle. He also foresaw that this power struggle at the cost of the lives of the high elves was destined to break Aurelia's heart. However, he still did his best to accompany her in her efforts, waiting for that 1 in a million chance of the high-level elves' brilliance. She didn't wait for that elven hope. She made things so difficult for Xueqi, made Xueqi do so much, and now it was time for her to give Xueqi an answer. Was she willing to use her transfer as the price in exchange for Xueqi's help to the high elves for the last time? She gently closed her eyes and pondered for 2 seconds. When Aurelia's beautiful eyes appeared in front of everyone again, they were no longer confused, but incomparably determined. Aurelia Windrunner's clear and melodious voice resounded in the hall. According to His Excellency Duke Marcus' request, I will unfurl this flag and raise it high. Then, I will ride on a chocobo and cross half of Silvery Moon to the top of the outer walls. I will plant this flag there and see how the horde will react. Who agrees and who objects? Her mellow voice was filled with determination. In fact, this was Aurelia's final tearful accusation against the vermin of the country and the useless people in high positions. That's right. As long as any of you still have a bit of backbone, then step forward and use the elves' methods to solve the elves' crisis. If all of you are useless trash, then don't blame me for hiring an outsider. Who agreed? Who objected? She said it lightly, but no one dared to say anything. Everyone knew that if Xueqi succeeded, then Xueqi would become an undying legend in the history of Azeroth. At the same time, it would be a huge blow to the reputation of the Xueqi royal family and the parliament. But in a crisis like this where the army was pressing down on the city, one wrong word could mean the end of one's political career and even one's life. The counselors, who would speak eloquently in this hall almost every time, were all mute. After Aurelia finished speaking, she waited for a full 10 seconds. Her gaze swept from left to right, from top to bottom, back and forth between the counselors and the Sunstrider father and son. When she found that no one dared to meet her gaze, Aurelia's face revealed a sad but resolute smile. That means no one is against it? Then I'm leaving. I'm leaving. Not only did this mean that she would step out of the hall and run to the top of the city wall, it also meant that she, the Ranger General who had been loyal to quell the loss for thousands of years, the heroine of the High Elves, would forever leave the people she once loved, her country, with disappointment and sorrow. Prince Kael, that was deeply hurt by this scene. He almost instinctively raised his right hand, as if he wanted to ask Aurelia to stay, but he still put down his hand dejectedly. After seeing the prince's action, Aurelia opened her mouth slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she didn't say a word. She turned around and walked away. Tisk! Illyria wasn't the only one. Servanas, who was also a ranger general, also turned around and left with her sister. However, what she left behind for the counselors was the back of her head, which was even more rebellious. Time in the hall seemed to freeze. No one spoke because everyone was waiting for the result. In the end, a shocking legend would be born. Or would it create a joke that would be laughed at for 10,000 years? Every high-ranking person was looking forward to it. Aurelia strode out of the hall, and her third and fourth sisters immediately came up to her. "Let's go!" A certain braggart claimed that he could scare off Orgrim with a flag. "Let's go and see!" Without hesitation, the four Windrunner sisters flew up to their mounts. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, they unfurled Duque's huge blue storm emblem flag. Compared to Silvermoon City, which had red and gold as its base color, this refreshing blue was so out of place. It was so abrupt and glaring. Moreover, an elven ranger general was holding up a human noble's flag. What did this mean? The moment the flag fluttered in the wind, Aurelia truly received the attention of the crowd. Suspicion, panic, unease, questioning, complaints, anger. Almost all the emotions gathered on Aurelia's face. Her arm was firm and strong, as if she had pulled a bough millions of times. Her body was as firm as a pine tree. She was not afraid of the rumors or the attacks of hostility. However, on her beautiful face, 2 drops of tears rolled down. Yes, these are the last 2 drops of tears that I, Aurelia Windrunner, shed for my beloved country. Through the long street. Through the square. Ignoring the bewildered citizens and the guards who tried to stop her, Aurelia finally arrived at the top of Silvermoon City's main gate. In her field of vision, a mixed army of tens of thousands of tribes and trolls had long been prepared to attack the city. Over 1,000 huge and crude catapults were lined up in a row. The orc laborers panted heavily, carrying heavy sandbags on their backs, ready to fill up all obstacles on the siege road, with sandbags or their corpses. The heavily armed orc warriors roared restlessly, and the even more cruel trolls continued to slaughter the elven captives before the battle began, carrying out the last blood sacrifice before the battle. However, when Aurelia rushed up to stand on the top of the city wall, she suddenly stirred up strong gusts of wind behind her, condensing the hurricane into a huge battle bow. After she shot out Duque's storm flag, half of the battlefield below fell silent. 500 meters away, the azure storm flag that was stuck in the ground fluttered in the wind. Every orc who saw this flag was in an uproar. There was no longer that fierce and unparalleled aura, but instead an indescribable panic. Chapter 390. It's Duke Marcus? It's Duke Marcus. It's really Duke Marcus. Beast men were very one-track-minded. They worshipped their own culture and heritage. Apart from a very small number of ambitious people, most orcs would rather fight a giant dragon than learn even a single character in another language. There were not many foreign names that ordinary beast men could remember. 90% of beast men didn't even know what trolls were called. They were often called skinny when they needed to. However, every beast man remembered a nightmarish name: Duke Marcus. They also remembered his blue flag with the symbol of a tornado, because this flag represented a terrifying legend that no orc hero had been able to break until now. There was only one meaning to this myth, and that was the blood of 500,000 orcs. From the elven forest fire, to the burning of Stormwind City, to the massacre by the battleship flying the blue Stormwind flag when crossing the sea, to the 2 meat grinder battles in South Shore, to the hinterlands being toyed with time and time again. Duque was the absolute nightmare of the beast men. Beast men often complained that warlocks used demonic powers. However, in the eyes of most beast men, Duque was the true king of demons. Rumor had it that Duque had endless magic power and countless devil's hands. When he released the flames of hell, he could destroy the heavens and earth. He could blow up a planet with 1 move, and pierce through the entire universe with 2 moves. Most beast men were illiterate anyway. The more they spread, the more unbelievable it became. If Orgrim was leading the hotheads who had just come from the dark portal, perhaps Orgrim would even try to trick them into testing the waters. Obviously, they weren't. They were the last elites of the Blackrock tribe, but they were also survivors who had been tortured and killed by Duque multiple times. They could kill any kingdom in the world without hesitation, or the owner of any flag, except for the owner of this flag. The former chief and great chief, Blackhand, was dead. Close to 60,000 Blackstone elites had become burial goods for Stormwind City. Even the Blacktooth clan, which had split off from the Blackrock clan, had suffered heavy casualties in the recent Battle of the Earthy Highlands due to an elemental giant princess who had appeared out of nowhere. Almost all of Xueqi's victories were built on the pain of the Blackrock clan. In the Blackrock clan, every household had the name of Xueqi, which was equivalent to the god of death. The morale of the entire orc camp declined at a visible rate. All of them lowered their heads, not even daring to look at the flag. Orgrim, who had never drunk demonic blood, maintained the natural reddish-brown skin of a beastman, but now his face was ashen. He was livid at the disappointment of his fellow clansmen. His face was also ashen because of another matter. Gul'dan. Did that female long ears use the power of the storm altar? Orgrim grabbed Gul'dan in shock and asked hurriedly. Gul'dan glanced at him, then lowered his head and replied, "Correct." This time, Orgrim did not feel anger at the disappointment of his clansmen. Instead, he felt a bone-chilling coldness. It was as if in that instant, the illusory death scythe had brushed past his majestic body like an untraceable cold wind. Everything that had happened since he had landed in the hinterlands replayed in his mind like a movie. Orgrim suddenly felt like he was a clown dancing in the palm of a ghost. He had thought that it was a good move to get a new force to join him and attack the main city of the elves from thousands of miles away. Who knew that everything he had done, every step he had taken, was all within Xueqi's calculations. If the evidence was not obvious before, everything could be explained from the moment he deciphered the runestone. Xueqi also coveted the power of the runestone, but due to the good relationship between the elves and humans, he could not take the initiative to do it. So, he used the orcs to destroy the runestone first, and then took advantage of it himself. The elves did not belong to the Lordaeron alliance. No matter how many elves died, it had nothing to do with him, a human, or the alliance. So, he could watch coldly from the perspective of a bystander as hundreds of thousands of elves were slaughtered by the allied forces of the orcs and the trolls, until the elves could not take it anymore and gave in. Of course, the horde had taken all the notoriety. It was obvious that Xueqi had reaped all the benefits. Even though Orgrim did not know what Xueqi had gotten, it was clear that Xueqi had gotten what he wanted. That was why he had raised the flag to warn the horde. Zuluhid did not seem to care and muttered, "So what if that Xueqi is here? I don't believe he can save so many long ears by himself." "Humph." Orgrim snorted coldly. "Duke Marcus has nothing to do with the holy power that his monarch believes in. He can even burn down the main city of his own country. Why can't he burn down the city of the long ears when the horde attacks this one, and let us be buried with the long ears? If he could be so cruel to himself, he would definitely be even more cruel to others." This logic seemed to be accurate. It was a pity that Orgrim would never know that Xueqi's origins had nothing to do with Stormwind City. Orgrim felt bitter. The great chief hesitated. With regards to Duke's defensive skills, Orgrim definitely had a deep understanding of them. The cries of his compatriots who had died under the three-dimensional attacks seemed to echo in Orgrim's ears. If Orgrim had the Horde's army at hand, he would have a steady stream of orc reinforcements with a dark portal supply line at his back. Perhaps Orgrim really did not believe it, and wanted to fight Xueqi. No matter what, destroying a race's capital was still something that boosted the morale of the race. That was under the premise that Xueqi did not interfere. But now, the situation had changed drastically. Originally, Orgrim thought that even if Grom Hellscream's main force could not take down the capital of the strongest human kingdom Lordaeron, they would still be able to deal a heavy blow to the allied forces. Who would have thought that Grom's assault would be destroyed by a new flaming weapon invented by Xueqi? He only found out about this after he promised Zujin to attack the elves and stepped into the Long Song forest. Grom could no longer rely on his own forces to break out of the encirclement, and needed his Blackrock clan. He did not have the capital to waste any more time here. Moreover, Xueqi's personality was one that would bite off a piece of flesh from you even if he suffered heavy losses. This gave Orgrim a headache the most. With all these factors in mind, Orgrim believed that retreating was the only option. He would never have thought that if he really wanted to fight, Silvery Moon would not be able to withstand it. "Inform Zujin. Retreat," the great chief ordered. Chapter 391. The ear-piercing sound of metal clanging rang out. Every orc lowered their shoulders as if they'd been pardoned, returning to camp with their equipment. On the city wall, Every single elf had their mouths wide open in disbelief as they acted as witnesses to this miraculous scene in astonishment. They retreated just like that? An army of 100,000 had been scared off by a flag? What flag was that? By the light of the sun. Could this be the flag of the legendary Titan of creation? On the city wall, the elves who didn't know what had happened were bursting with curiosity. They all looked inquisitively at General Aurelia, who'd shot the entire flag 500 meters away. Aurelia ignored their gazes and muttered to herself. He did it. Yes, he did. Windsor was the first to answer. Hee. It seems like there's nothing our new master can't do. Savannah's added in a rebellious tone. Only you and Big Sis agreed to the transfer, the quietest Lilith complained. Aurelia smiled bitterly. Silly sister, we all ran, but you still didn't want to. This is bad for you. Savannah's clamped fourth sister's neck under his arm and smirked. If you're really that unwilling, you shouldn't have followed Big Sis and me to ride chocobos across half of Silvery Moon to demonstrate to the counselors. Lilith didn't say anything, tacitly admitting that her second sister had seen through her thoughts. At that moment, the ones who were the most shocked were the counselors who were watching the live broadcast, as well as the Sun King and his son. Retreated? They retreated just like that? Although everyone could tell that the troll was unwilling, he'd still retreated in the end. Retreating with a single flag? No. That was retreating with a single flag. If not for the fact that the humans and orcs had been at war for more than a year, and millions of lives had been sacrificed in the war and massacre, the hatred between them would have been so intense that it couldn't be resolved. The elves would definitely think that the orcs and humans were putting on a show to trick the high elves. Of course, the unease and panic on the faces of the orc warriors couldn't lie. Now, regardless of whether Xueqi had used his illustrious reputation or something else to achieve it, Xueqi had done it. Even if the negotiations between Xuel Salis and the Alliance failed, at least Xueqi had helped them by the most precious time. Whether the high elves were willing or not, the entire Xuel Salis was now in a state of war. Every 3 days, 100 groups of qualified blade throwers could be trained from the civilians who had never been in combat. 1,000 craftsmen who were engaged in other jobs could be turned into craftsmen for war machines. The structure craftsmen could produce 50 thrown arcane guards. The high elves were stunned. When they truly unearthed their combat potential, they would be able to hold on for a while longer. Of course, without Xueqi, they wouldn't have been able to hold on for too long. The most important reason was that the country had fallen too quickly. Nearly 50% of the citizens outside Silvermoon City had either been slaughtered or blocked by the Horde's army. When the Trolls' headhunting squad wiped out all of these resistors, the disadvantage of the elves' small population would be magnified. The few elves could not resist the Horde's army at all. At this moment, everything was different. The haze of war had not completely dissipated, but at least everyone could see the light of hope, even if that light came from a human named Xueqi. In the hall, the Sun King Anastrian spoke. Sir Marcus, your reputation is so great that every eyewitness is amazed. I have to admit that although you are young, you do indeed have the ability to lead this terrible war between races. Let us use this as the basis for our negotiations. As the Sun King waved his hand, a magic device beneath Xueqi's feet was activated. Don't misunderstand, it was not a magic trap, but a raised platform. 1 level, 2 levels, a total of 9 levels, allowing Xueqi to rise to the same height as the Sun King. A rectangular table appeared between the Sun King and Xueqi. The Silver Moon Council's acting chairman, Morlenz, could only sit next to the Sun King. On the other hand, Xueqi let Alucia sit next to him, acting as a clerk. With the posture set, the other counselors could only listen from a few levels lower. It seemed that they were not even qualified to speak. This was the punishment the Sun King gave to the counselors after he regained control of the country. After sitting down, Xueqi's first words were, "Before the negotiations officially begin, I have a small personal request." "Speak." "I have great admiration for your Ranger General, Illyria Windrunner, and her Ranger family. After the war with the Beastmen, I will have a small half of the Elven Forest. Therefore, I need an excellent team of Rangers to help me take care of my forest. I wonder if your Majesty is willing to part with this? A small request? I'm afraid this is your biggest goal, isn't it?" Anastrian's murky eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. "The elves are free. We allow different opinions and lifestyles. Just like how our fellow night elves could not accept our pursuit of magic more than 6,000 years ago and agreed to let us leave. For those elves who wish to live a different life, we will not be overly demanding. Thank you in advance. But I also have a small condition. Xueqi narrowed his eyes, his deep black pupils bursting with a look that said, "If you are too different, don't blame me for flipping the table. Speak. Before the main force of the horde is chased out of the Longsong forest, every windrunner must continue to wear the badge of Xueqi Salis." Sure. Xueqi knew that this was the High Elves' pride at work. The Sunstrider royal family did not have a princess, so naturally there was no marriage alliance. Even if they lost face now, it was not a big deal. But if everyone knew that reinforcements were obtained by selling off their own general, how could the Sunstrider lead this country in the future? Contrary to the expectations of the Sun King and the Silver Moon Council, Xueqi did not put forward any harsh demands, such as territory or the large amount of magic literature and knowledge that the High Elves regarded as treasures. Instead, he put forward many things or requests that the High Elves did not understand. First, the Lordaeron Alliance urgently needed mages. After ensuring the safety of the Longsong Forest, Xueqi Salis had to send no less than 20 Morningstar mages and 5 Radiant Moon mages to form a 1,000-man team of mages to participate in the battle against the orcs. The team of mages would listen directly to the current Commander-in-Chief and Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Alliance. They would serve until the passage through which the orcs came to Azeroth, the Dark Portal, was closed. Second was technology. Xueqi did not ask for magic knowledge, but instead asked for a large pile of information on arcane construct guards, as well as magic crystals that could be counted in tons. Of course, this batch of crystals was a sky-high fortune for the Dalajan, but for Xueqi Salis, who owned the sun well and could mass-produce magic crystals, it was a drop in the bucket. Finally, there was the legal marriage and residency rights between the High Elves and humans. Chapter 392. The other counselors couldn't understand it. The old and wise Sun King understood most of it. First of all, for both public and private reasons, there seemed to be nothing wrong with mobilizing the mages. To quote Xueqi Salis, "You can't possibly let Prince Kale, that's work for you, Xueqi, right?" Sun King immediately knew that the people Xueqi had taken away were all members of the Silver Moon Council. There were mages on the Alliance's side, mages on the Horde's side, and also mysterious and evil sorcerers. No one could guarantee that no one would die in battle. When more counselors died, the Sun King would naturally have a way to fill the vacancies. At that time, the Parliament would definitely not be a monolithic block, and there would be great opportunities. Secondly, there were the magic crystals. Xueqi, of course, said that it was to make up for the consumption of the Alliance's mages in the magic war. But as for how to distribute the magic, the commander was the King of Warriors, Lothar, who only knew a little about magic. Wasn't it up to Xueqi, who was in charge of magic in the Alliance? Finally, there was the right to marry. On the surface, it looked like Xueqi was doing this for his own selfish reasons. He might have a chance to marry Aurelia. However, the Sun King felt that it was not that simple. The High Elves used to boast that their bloodline was nobler than the other races, and they were not allowed to marry openly. Most of the time, they only allowed those who wanted to marry a foreign race to leave their own race. Now that Xueqi had broken this restriction, there must be a deeper meaning behind it. However, it was not something that the Sun King could understand. In any case, Xueqi didn't make things difficult for the elves on the core issue that the elves were most concerned about. This was already Xueqi being merciful. After all the aid from the Alliance was specified within a limited time, the leaders of both sides officially signed. That night, the Sunstrider royal family eagerly announced their decision to join the Alliance to all their citizens, as well as all the terms transparently and openly. Xueqi even swore to the elven citizens that the Alliance had not made any unreasonable demands. That was all. Well, his personal request was actually more important. From Xueqi's point of view, the Windrunner family was worth more than all of Xueqi Salis. The tribe did not attack that night, so the Sun King decided to take advantage of this rare free time to hold a small party to celebrate joining the Alliance. Small only referred to the number of participants. The specifications were still off the charts. Almost all the big shots in Silver Moon City had come. Melodious music, psychedelic lighting, and especially elf-style sweet wine, in particular, when the marquises and duchesses deliberately showed off their curvaceous bodies in front of Xueqi. Xueqi deeply understood why people said that the upper class of the High Elves was rather decadent. But then again, looking at the rosy cheeks, the delicate lips, the plump snow-white skin, and the towering twin peaks, Xueqi almost couldn't hold them in. "Dear host, These females are very much in line with your aesthetic standards, but for the sake of your safety and integrity, I must inform you that the 4 female high elves with the surname Windrunner are watching you in a special way. Shut up. After bickering with the system elf in his own mental world, Duke saw Kale, that's coming over. Oh, that's rare. Duke, I thought you worked so hard to get father to approve the intermarriage because you wanted to get some benefits for yourself? Kale, that's and Duke didn't have any irreconcilable conflicts. It should be said that they didn't have any conflicts at all, so they were still considered friends in private. Duque raised his exquisite crystal wine glass. All right, I admit that the beauties of the high elves are definitely the most unique scenery I've seen in my life. For most high elves, time is eternal, and only white scenery is left in the sky of history. So they seek excitement and novelty to tell themselves that they are still alive. As expected of the handsome prince who was known for being cultured and refined. Even his casual words were so philosophical and poetic. Duque smiled. Does that mean that the universe in which you are in is blurred, and everything is like a dream? Kale was slightly stunned. He did not expect Duque to be so cultured. After all, he had never talked to Duque in detail, and subconsciously felt that a 16-year-old youth from a commoner's background would not have good self-restraint. Kale smiled subconsciously. If this is a dream, then it's too bad. I hope this is just a slight low point in the long river of history. Yes, this is indeed a low point for the high elves, as an ally of the elves for 3,000 years. And as a good friend of yours, Kale, I should do my part to help you and the high elves rise again. Duque rarely boasted like this. Coupled with Duque's shocking achievements, this kind of empty promise seemed extra tempting. Kale, was unusually clear-headed. Although I can't wait to see your heroism, Duque, before that, we have to at least wait for a new batch of soldiers to be trained. It's fine. In 5 days at most, our armies will be able to converge, and then we can hunt together, Duque said mysteriously. There were some things that could not be said openly. Kale, was not sure what Duque had prepared. But one thing was certain, and that was that Duque had found the Sunstrider royal family and not the Silver Moon Council as a partner. Finally getting rid of the wild bees and butterflies, it did not take Duque long to find Aurelia, who was drinking alone on a balcony not far from the banquet hall. Her gorgeous long golden hair fluttered gently in the night wind. Her exquisite and flawless facial features were like a perfect work of art. Under her thin eyelashes, the pair of green eyes that he had just glimpsed were closed, but one could still feel the charm that sucked people in. From a distance, her body was so slender that it seemed like porcelain that would shatter at a touch. She could not be considered the most perfect and beautiful. Purely from a delicate point of view, Aurelia even lost to Princess Kalia Menethil. But when he walked closer, he found that the long period of training made her figure easily outline a very sexy and wild beauty at any time. After killing so many people, there was naturally a faint murderous aura. This aura naturally made Aurelia a special existence that most people could only look at from afar and not play with. But to Duque, she exuded a breathtaking charm. It was such a beautiful woman who seemed to have walked out of the legends of bards, a mixture of wild and noble beauty, who had an indescribable desolation on her face at this moment. A gust of wind blew, and Aurelia turned her head, her green eyes staring at Duque. Do you know? Sometimes I wonder if I can continue to live in a dream called Supreme Glory of the High Elves if I kill you, and I don't have to bear the pain of leaving my compatriots and country. Chapter 393. Kill me, and I'll resurrect too. Duque thought quietly in his heart. Duque sighed softly. The world has changed. If I don't open my eyes, I'll only fall into the deepest despair the moment I wake up. It's not too late, Aurelia. You can still regret it. Regret what? Regret that I didn't see the Silver Moon Council's true colors earlier? Or regret that I served you? What a joke. I, Aurelia Windrunner, never regret what I do. Illyria wasn't wearing her ranger uniform. She was only wearing a pure white evening dress. On the surface, she looked like a gentle and pleasant beauty, but in reality, she was a heroine as fierce as a storm. At some point, Aurelia was already leaning on Duque's shoulder, who was wearing a blue and white evening gown. Because Duque had grown taller, Aurelia was now slightly lower than Duque's head. She snuggled up to Duque, and even when Duque consciously hugged her waist, she didn't feel uncomfortable at all. It was as harmonious as a perfect painting. Duque said lightly, "It's good that you don't regret it. Little rascal, not regretting it doesn't mean you're not sad or in pain. After a pause, Aurelia continued, don't move, just let me lean on you for a while. Okay. The two snuggled up to each other, enjoying the warmth from each other and the warm feeling of their souls merging. After an unknown period of time. Hey, Xueqi, what will happen to Azeroth in the future? Xueqi looked up at the starry sky with a deep expression. His gaze seemed to have transcended the void, transcended history, and arrived at a certain node in the future. Xueqi's voice was ethereal and dreamy. The Burning Legion has made a move again. Even if I don't want to admit it, beating Sargeras into the bottomless abyss isn't the end. In 5 years at the earliest, or 10 years at the latest, the Burning Legion will definitely make a bigger move. At that time, we might need all the races to work together to get through this. Aurelia's whole body trembled, and the 3 beautiful figures who had been eavesdropping on the tree not far away also trembled. The Windrunner sisters recalled all of Xueqi's miracles. That kind of prophecy of the highest level, like a charlatan, gave each of them a strange premonition. It was as if their fates would be tightly linked to Xueqi's future. He gently stroked Aurelia's soft golden hair. But before that, I promise you that I will make the culprit behind the massacre of the High Elves, Xueqi, pay the most tragic price. At that moment, Xueqi felt Aurelia's fingers tighten around him. Those fingers that looked like tender white jade suddenly turned into the sharpest dragon's claws. The great force that came from those fingers made Xueqi's shoulder feel a little pain. I'm sorry. Aurelia suddenly came to her senses and apologized. It's okay. Xueqi silently added the fitness option to his growth plan. Should I get a battle mage subclass? Almost at the same time, Xueqi, who was in the tribe's main camp, felt his mind go blank. The tribe has done enough for the trolls. Now it's time for the trolls to fulfill their promise and serve the tribe. I need the trolls to obey orders and follow us to attack the humans' capital. Xueqi thought that he was hearing things. However, the serious expressions of Orgrim and the other tribe chiefs told him that they were not joking. The hatred accumulated over the generations, the voices and smiles of the trolls who had died tragically, all of this seemed to naturally appear in his mind. He almost didn't think, and subconsciously smashed the table in front of him, shouting, "Don't worry, I'll kill you." Betrayal. This is the tribe's betrayal to the trolls. A ray of black light shot out from the Troll King's palm, almost splitting Orgrim's hideous face in half. It was a battle axe. A battle axe that had been strengthened by the power of storms. Kargath Bladefist, the chieftain of the Shattered Palm clan, swung the blade attached to his arm like lightning, instantly knocking away the battle axe that Xueqi had thrown. The battle axe that flew away hit the largest support of the huge tent. With a loud bang, a gust of wind shot out from the axe. Under the impact of the wind, the huge tent that was made of animal skin was torn into pieces by the huge force, flying everywhere in an instant. The turbulence caused by the wind instantly sent a few of the personal guards stationed near the chieftain's tent flying. One of them even crashed into a huge stone pillar beside the tent, almost causing him to cry out in pain. However, the loyal personal guard did not have the time to complain. He ignored the pain in his back that felt like all the bones in his body had been broken, and crawled up from the ground. As he rushed towards the tent, he shouted, "Enemy attack!" The chieftain's tent was attacked. In less than a second, the entire tribe's camp was in an uproar. "It's okay. Calm down. All of you calm down." Orgrim's thunderous roar temporarily calmed the crowd down. When the gigantic tent collapsed, revealing the panting Xueqi and the cold-looking Kargath, who had raised the sharp blade in his arm, all of them realized that the trolls and the horde seemed to have fallen apart. Xueqi was not alone. Besides Xueqi, there were also a few chieftains from different clans. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Xueqi was a small chieftain of the tribe. When Xueqi got into a fighting stance, they naturally took out their weapons. Originally, the beastmen and trolls had already set up camp together, and there were no fences separating them. Now that there was such a sudden turn of events, everyone was dumbfounded. They picked up their weapons, not knowing whether they should attack or not. Orgrim, you liar. We agreed to conquer the entire world together. The beastmen wanted the plains and mountains, and the trolls wanted all the forests. Xueqi excitedly waved his long and powerful arms, roaring loudly. The tribe did not lie to you. This is our final goal. However, in the contract we wrote that The tribe will help you defeat the main forces of the High Elves, and the trolls will take their final revenge. It was clearly written in the contract. Orgrim took out the contract and raised it up high. The tribe has killed a total of 70,000 High Elves in the 2 battles. In reality, you trolls have also killed more than 100,000 High Elven civilians. The tribe has fulfilled its promise. No, this is not enough. Those long-eared Silvery Moon City are still here. Why? Why did the beast men retreat when they saw the blue war flag today? No, the main point is not the war flag. The main point is that we have received the latest news. The tribe's other army of 200,000 beast men has been obstructed and surrounded in the Silvery Pine Forest. We need to quickly conquer the capital of a human kingdom, reduce the pressure on them, and rescue them. Orgrim tried to cover up everything by saying that it was a strategic need. From a strategic point of view, Orgrim's choice was undoubtedly correct. Chapter 394. After all the chiefs agreed that Xueqi was using the Horde to weaken the High Elves. If the Horde dared to attack Silvery Moon, Xueqi would dare to burn the city again. Even if it was a perfect misunderstanding, and even if Xueqi wanted to burn the city, the elves would not allow it. But the Horde did not know. An alliance that had not been broken for 2,800 years. It sounded grand, didn't it? The Horde was a different race and lacked information. Who knew about the petty conflicts between the humans and the elves? In the end, all the chiefs thought that rather than wasting their elites on the elves, who could not harm the humans, it was better to send troops to attack the humans' vital cities. It was a pity that a very intelligent beastman leader met a great demon leader who only knew how to act based on emotions and had long since been blinded by hatred. The result was destined to be a tragedy. No. The trolls will not recognize this alliance written in the common human language. It's full of word games. As long as the Horde fights with the trolls, we will still be brothers. We will still be brothers. Xueqi raised his remaining battle axe and roared. Orgrim felt aggrieved. There was no direct translation between the troll and beastman languages. The only way to communicate was in the common human language. Xueqi, how could you just destroy an alliance written in the common human language? Orgrim was furious. To be honest, the beastmen were not a race with a good temper. I, Orgrim, am the chief of the Horde. I have to consider the interests of the entire Horde, not the trolls. Do you think that if there is a single High Elf who is still alive, I will have 50,000 elites accompany you trolls to kill the last elf? Yes, that's right. This is the only way you can show your sincerity. This is the only way you are qualified to be the trolls' allies. Zulud suddenly stepped forward and swept away all the obstacles between him and Xueqi. I repeat on behalf of the chief, the Horde does not only have trolls. We have beast men, ogres, golems, death knights. The trolls do not have the right to ask the entire Horde to be their fighters. Without the support of the Horde, you trolls are only fit to be rats in the depths of the forest. You can't even step into the Long Song forest. Xueqin's face turned red at Zulahid's blunt humiliation. Rats? How dare you call the people of the Great Amani Empire rats? No existence could insult the giant demons. No, Zulahid. Kneel down and apologize to the ancestors of the giant demons. Apologize? Never. The trolls can't do anything without the orcs. Why should the brave orcs apologize? This time, Zulud was furious, and he whistled. A huge adult dragon suddenly soared into the sky from the back of the camp. Even if it was unwilling, it would let Xueqi know what a dragon's breath was as long as Zulahid gave the order. Zulahid, this is your last chance. If you don't kneel down and apologize, I'll use the wind to cut off your legs and make you kneel forever. Xueqi waved his axe. Bastard. Think about it, if we hadn't built the storm altar for you, where did you get the power of the storm? Zulud pulled out his warhammer and blasted. Enough. It's enough. Do you really want to fight here and let the humans and elves on the walls laugh at us? Orgrim rushed in between the two and smashed his hammer into the ground. Sand flew everywhere, and a huge circular pit with a diameter of more than 3 meters appeared. Everyone could feel the frightening power of the great chief. For a moment, the whole place was silent. However, the tense atmosphere did not ease at all. Orgrim saw that the ogres and orcs, who had always been close to each other, were now standing in 2 distinct lines. They held their weapons in their hands and looked at each other nervously. Orgrim suddenly realized that the honeymoon period between the Horde and the giant demons had ended the moment Duque's war flag appeared. Orgrim recited the nightmarish name with the greatest hatred in his heart. Duke Marcus. Is this your plan? Is this what you wanted to see? Very well. I, Orgrim, will remember your treachery. Orgrim gritted his sharp teeth, and suddenly looked up at Xueqi, his eyes like lightning. Wake up, Xueqi. The war between the giant demons and the elves has lasted for 6,000 years. In these 6,000 years, neither of you have completely destroyed the other. It is not easy to destroy the other in a short period of time. In order to destroy an intelligent race, it would take a long time and many victories, little by little. The giant demons have won enough this time. As long as the giant demons remain in the Horde, we will destroy all the elves, humans, and dwarves, and dominate this planet. Orgrim's earnest guidance could not be said to be without good intentions. If it were another clear-headed leader with a higher level of intelligence, perhaps he would have listened. Unfortunately, revenge and the consecutive victories had caused Xueqi's originally low intelligence to fall to the same level as a retard. He decisively refused. There's no need. The giant demons are ashamed to be associated with a tribe that was scared away by a flag. Xueqi raised the remaining axe in his hand and shouted, Giant demons! We don't need to rely on the cowardly orc tribe. We can destroy Silvery Moon City ourselves. The hearts of the giant demons were stirred up by Xueqi's provocative declaration. They immediately raised their weapons and let out a heaven-shaking roar. Their spears were like a forest, and it really did look like that. Xueqi didn't care about Orgrim and the others' reactions. He just led the troll chieftains away. Idiot! Don't you think that without us, they wouldn't even have the right to step into the Eternal Song Forest? Zuluhid scolded. What should we do? Kargath Bladefist asked. Go. And as soon as possible. Orgrim picked up the map that had fallen to the ground and drew a circle on it. Finally, it landed on a name. We'll go like this and then go here. The tribe chiefs thought for a while and finally nodded. Back at Silvery Moon City, at the banquet hall, Duque reluctantly let go of Aurelia. Duque, rest early. Perhaps tomorrow will be a bitter battle. After all, there are at least 4 days before your reinforcements arrive. Bitter battle? What bitter battle? Duque pretended to be ignorant. What do you mean? The High Elves can't defeat the orcs, ogres, goblins and giant demons, but can't they defeat a group of giant demons who don't even know how to break through magic? Duque replied with a faint smile. Oh, if this is true, then this is definitely the best news I've heard since Quel Salis was invaded. The one who replied was not Aurelia, but Prince Kale, who had unknowingly appeared in the corridor a few meters away. Chapter 395. Raising his hand, the prince bowed apologetically. I didn't mean to eavesdrop on your conversation. I just happened to hear it when I came over. Aurelia shrugged, indicating that she had already sensed it. It's okay. I don't mind. The prince immediately asked anxiously, Is this the hunt you were talking about? Yes. If I'm not wrong, my appearance was enough to make the chief of the tribe, Orgrim, give up on attacking Silver Moon City and ask the trolls to leave with the tribe. But Orgrim obviously underestimated the trolls' hatred, madness, and stubbornness towards the elves. So the division of the tribe is almost inevitable. At the earliest, the main force of the tribe will leave tonight, leaving only the trolls to continue attacking Silver Moon City. Duque's words made the eyes of the prince, Aurelia, and the 3 windrunners in charge of eavesdropping immediately brighten. Really? 1 man and 4 women, 5 voices almost at the same time. F***CK. Illyria was his rumored girlfriend. Forget about his rumored future sisters-in-law eavesdropping, they even gave themselves away together. What the hell was this? Duque was very embarrassed. Duque could only pretend that he was not talking about love and communicating with Aurelia. With a businesslike expression, he raised the wine glass that he had placed on the balcony railing. Yes, a hunt. Consider it a small gift from me and Kale. That's as a witness of friendship. Awesome. Too awesome. Kale's eyebrows almost stretched to the side of the door frame in joy. Of course, this was an exaggerated figure of speech. Don't believe it. But the prince's joy was not simple. Kale, that had lived for more than 1,000 years, and he had also been an idiot for more than 1,000 years. He had always been a perfectionist, and he had always lived in the gap between responsibility and glory. He was afraid that if he did not do well, he would not be able to be a role model for the elves. So Kale, that had always been more demanding of himself than a Virgo's perfectionist creed. Ever since his army was defeated, he had been under too much pressure. Even if he did not want to listen or ask, he could still hear the criticism of his subjects from time to time, and feel the resentful gazes of the families of the fallen. Those were the lives of 20,000 high elves. Just like that, the hopes of the clansmen were destroyed by him. Perhaps he could use various objective circumstances to explain this defeat. But to him, Kale, this was the worst first battle he had ever had. A defeat was a defeat. No matter what explanation he used, this was a stain that he, Kale, could not erase. A stain that would accompany him for life. For the past few days, he had been trying his best to cheer himself up, comforting and encouraging himself. However, his mental exhaustion was getting worse. He really didn't know when the mountain-like mental pressure would crush him. Just when he felt that he couldn't take it anymore and was about to collapse, Xueqi actually said that he would give him a great credit. Even if he knew that Xueqi would get the most credit. But his heart couldn't help but jump for joy. That's right. Even if it was a victory without doing anything, it was 10,000 times better than not winning. On the other side, Aurelia also tactfully resolved the prince's embarrassment. His Highness Kale, is an excellent prince. Unfortunately, the situation forced him to put an excessive burden on his shoulders too early. If it was done step by step, His Highness would definitely do better. Yes, that previous battle was a pity. To let a dumb guy with no military experience. Dumb guy. Kale, was puzzled by this title. Xueqi, this bastard, was seriously making up a big truth that even he didn't believe. In my hometown, it's customary to add the word Z to the first word of a man's name to form a nickname for him. That's why I'm used to calling Kale, dumb guy. Sorry, if you don't like it, I can. No. I like the title dumb guy very much. Kale, voluntarily entered the dumb guy mode. Please go back to the previous topic. Well, even the gods couldn't save him. Why do humans have knight candidates and reserve soldiers? It's the same logic. To suddenly let a dumb guy who has never commanded an army command 20,000 people, to be honest, it's not your fault. It's the council that forced you to take the position of commander. Kale frowned slightly. But Xueqi, you don't seem to have any battlefield experience before? No. I do. When I first became an earth mage, I commanded a dozen mercenaries to deal with the gnolls. Then it was the fishmen and the nagas. Then I led the most experienced Sir Lothar and more than 200 elites to raid Karazhan. Then I organized the defense of a district in Stormwind City. Xueqi continued to speak the big truth with a serious face. Xueqi had indeed climbed up step by step, but his miraculous performance in suppressing the tribes was all because he was familiar with history as a transmigrator. Anyway, it was enough to fool the inexperienced Kale. Aurelia didn't think there was anything wrong with it. So, dumb guy, what you need the most now is a mentor who can give you actual combat experience and guide you to deal with the tense situation in front of you and achieve victory. That's right. That person is your brother, me, Xueqi. It sounded very mysterious and full of a sense of deception. Unfortunately, Xueqi's battle record was too frightening, and the momentum of repelling an army with one flag was too awesome. Kale, had to believe it. If there was anything that overwhelmed his last bit of hesitation, it was undoubtedly the good news from the messenger. Your Highness. Good news. There was an internal strife in the tribe just now. The main force of the tribe, mainly orcs, is withdrawing from the camp. Only the trolls are left. Kale and the others were all shocked. Kale looked at Xueqi again. His eyes filled with almost fanatical worship. Xueqi revealed a mysterious smile. What did I just say? Kale completely ignored it. He directly bowed his head and said in the most humble tone, Xueqi. No. Mentor Marcus. Please teach me how to win a battle. Xueqi hurriedly helped Kale up. There's no need for honorifics. I'm your friend, so it's not a problem for me to give you some pointers. As long as you listen to me, I guarantee that you'll get rid of your decadence.
Really?
Yes. The first thing you have to do is wait for the main force of the tribe to leave. Then, before my reinforcements arrive, just rely on the elven troops to deal a heavy blow to the troll main force.
What?
Kale, that's immediately lost his voice. Please, have some confidence in yourself, okay? You're now facing a troll army that, except for a few leaders, doesn't know magic at all and can't fight against magic. Didn't you high elves use magic to oppress the trolls for thousands of years? What you did in the past, just do it now. I'll teach you how to deal with the powerhouses on the other side. Xueqi patiently guided. Oh no, patiently instructed the dumb guy. Chapter 396. How did Kale, that's become an out-and-out rich man in history? From a handsome prince who was loved by everyone, had flat tires, and admired by tens of thousands of people, he had become a villain boss that everyone wanted to kill. Even his own people didn't like him, and everyone wanted him dead. This was a very long and complicated story. Of course, this could be attributed to many objective factors. For example, when Kale that's took over the High Elves' blame, it was during the destruction of Kuel Salis, the destruction of Silvermoon City, and the death of his father and the Silvermoon Council. As the only high-ranking member who survived, Kale that's had no choice but to come out and carry the flag. The times could create heroes. If Kale that's really had an indomitable will, he might really be hero material. Unfortunately, not every hero was called Lothar, and not every hero had the will, strength and luck to restore the country. The biggest reason why Kale that's could not rise again from the righteous path was his lack of willpower. In the first half of his life, he had not suffered any setbacks at all. He also wanted to work hard and deal with the challenges. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions of the council on the royal power, the council spared no effort to obstruct Kale that's growth. Even though Kale that's had practiced powerful magic, he was still a prince who was like a flower in a greenhouse. On the surface, he looked perfect, but in fact, he was very easy to fool. This was why he had led his people away from the righteous path because of a small conspiracy and a small trick by Queen Naga Vashj. Xueqi had guessed correctly. At this moment, Kale that was definitely under a lot of pressure. Those who are capable must lead their people to stand up and fight. This is an unshirkable responsibility of the Sunstrider royal family.
You are the only heir of the Sunstrider.
You must bear this responsibility. Anastrian's strict teachings had made Kale that's feel like he was walking on a single log bridge connecting two cliffs for a long time. This failure and the death of 20,000 troops had directly broken the single log bridge in Kale that's heart. However, at the moment when Kale that was about to fall into the abyss of his soul, if someone inadvertently or intentionally extended a helping hand, they would receive a compromise from the bottom of their heart. Just like that, Kale that's dominance and influence over the High Elves was unknowingly stolen by Xueqi. In reality, Kale that's had completed a spiritual escape with a joyful and relieved state of mind. Perhaps he didn't realize it now, but once he encountered a similar desperate situation in the future, Kale that's would unknowingly trust Xueqi and become dependent on Xueqi. The system genie jumped out. Host, I have to say, you are really despicable, and shameless.
Shut up.
In history, because a certain Grand Marshal of the Alliance was an idiot, most of the High Elves went to the tribe and became the most attractive people in the tribe. Before Xueqi's transmigration, more than 40% of the Horde players were Blood Elves who were descended from the High Elves. From this, it could be seen that the Blood Elves were the only scenery in the tribe where most races were vicious and affected the appearance of the city. The High Elves had all kinds of bad habits and arrogant habits, but Xueqi still didn't want to leave the High Elves to the tribe. Xueqi was trying hard to bluff Kale, that's trying to keep the High Elves from going astray. Of course, in the eyes of Aurelia and her sisters, Xueqi could be said to be great. The next day, the main force of the tribe really withdrew. Wash your necks and prepare to die. Despicable long ears. The Amani clan will become your grave diggers. Hurry up and surrender. This way, we can at least give you a quick death. The trolls shouted as they continued to torture and kill the elven captives. Kale that's had the urge to stuff a pyroblast into Zujin's mouth as he looked at the giant demon army, which was small in number but still arrogant and clamoring non-stop. Xueqi reminded Kale that's, calm down. Kale, if you lead the army and rush down now, you can at most kill a few thousand trolls.
The remaining trolls will either quickly return to the embrace of the tribe, or they will run around the entire Long Song forest and continue killing your people.
But even if you go down immediately, you still won't be able to save those people with axes on their necks. Their deaths are not your responsibility, but the Silver Moon Council's.
Xueqi didn't even blink as he diverted Kale. That's anger.
All right, we'll follow your suggestion, Xueqi. We'll show the enemy that we're weak. Just half an hour ago, Kale that's, as the chief commander of the city defense, had personally announced Xueqi's suggestion. Show the enemy that we're weak. Before the orc army of Orgrim rolled out of the Long Song forest, they definitely couldn't hurt the troll army. Thus, the following scene happened. The gates of Silvermoon City opened, and hundreds of giant arcane guards over 5 meters tall and weighing over 5 tons charged out under the control of the mages. Following the arcane guards was Aurelia's rangers. Arcane guards. The trolls had no lack of experience fighting against these giant magical creatures. In fact, the Amani trolls all knew the terror of these giant constructs. But today, something seemed different. A mossy troll raised a giant warhammer and roared, dodging the arcane guard's huge fist, and smashed the arcane guard's bluish-purple arm joint. Apart from the core being powered by magic, the arcane guard's entire body was made of high-strength metal. It was especially difficult to destroy it with physical attacks. But this time, when the heavy hammer hit its arm, it actually let out a shrill sound of metal colliding with metal. The hammer bounced off, and the giant metal arm let out a series of unbearable sounds. Just as the troll was dumbfounded, the arcane guard's entire arm fell off. Haha! Long Ear's best arcane toys have all been destroyed by the orcs. Jaren, who was controlled by the orcs, had indeed destroyed many arcane guards. The trolls instinctively thought that the high elves were at their wits' end. On the other side, Xueqi also personally entered the fray. Wielding 2 giant axes, his storm combo was so fast that after a series of clanging sounds, the 7 axes hit the same spot one after another. The last axe finally chopped off the head of an arcane guard that was in good condition, deeply embedding the axe into the central circuit of the arcane guard. A burst of purplish-blue sparks that were unique to the arcane construct burst out, and the arcane guard let out an unintelligible mechanical sound, followed by a series of cracking sounds, and the entire arcane guard fell apart. Chapter 397. In the forest not far from the battlefield in front of Silvery Moon, a few orc scouts were watching the scene unfold before them. The mystics of the horde were mainly warlocks, with shamans as support. All the twin-headed ogre mages were pure elemental attack mages, unlike the humans in the Dalajan Kingdom, who had spent more than 2,000 years to develop a complete magic civilization. The horde did not have magical communication. In terms of sending messages, they were still in the era of running and messengers. No one in the horde felt that there was a problem. In fact, Orgrim was already very satisfied with the addition of the Red Dragon to the team of messengers. Now, these scouts quickly got what they wanted. When the scouts caught up to Orgrim, they reported to the chief how the High Elves had easily and effectively sent the unsteady arcane guards to their deaths, and how the High Elven Rangers had accurately dodged the rain of javelins that were almost invisible to the naked eye. In the end, the trolls had won the battle. Orgrim let out a long sigh. Someone will have to pay a terrible price for their stupidity. Before it was us, now it's the trolls. But at least I can confirm that Silvery Moon is indeed under Xueqi's command. The chieftains who were walking slowly beside Orgrim all nodded their heads, as if saying yes. Duke's expression of approval was that's King Sinister. If the elves had heavily injured the trolls after the horde's main force had retreated, Xueqi might have woken up and come back pitifully to the horde. That way, even if Xueqi was useless, he could still bring 20 to 30,000 trolls who were good at throwing javelins. Unfortunately, Xueqi did not give Orgrim the chance. As long as the orcs did not leave, Xueqi would suppress the high elves and not lay a hand on the trolls. Didn't the trolls want to win? Here, I'll send you some useless toys to dismantle every day to fool those silly trolls into thinking that I can really win. But the horde could not wait. Orgrim did not know how long Dogrom Hellscream could last. Moreover, Xueqi's reinforcements had already started to enter Long Song Forest. They maintained a safe distance of at least 150 kilometers from the main force of the tribe, and took a detour from the west side of the forest towards Silver Moon City. It wasn't that Orgrim didn't think of ambushing the reinforcements, but when he found out that Xueqi had managed to bring Stormwind's fleet to the west coast of Long Song Forest,
He knew that the Horde had no chance here. Between the Orc army and the human reinforcements, there was still an army of early warning robots that covered the mountains and plains. In the worst-case scenario, if the human reinforcements were really ambushed by the Horde, they could still retreat to the sea under the cover of the cannons of the warships.
Who said that your tribe doesn't have sea power?
Duke Marcus, how great would it be if you were an orc?
Orgrim muttered to himself.
He then raised his head and said without turning his head, "Let's go.
One day, we will conquer the entire world. When that time comes, every human, elf, and dwarf will have to crawl under the feet of the orcs."
Even though the Battle of Quell the Lost gave Orgrim the feeling that it started anticlimactic, but the humans' use of tactics and strategies, especially Duke's military tactics, seemed to have opened a door to a wider field for him, and Orgrim felt that he had benefited a lot from it.
Orgrim was not the only one who had benefited greatly. Kale that was the same. For 3 consecutive days, Kale that's listened to the Rangers' report on the retreat of the orcs while watching the Trolls' monkey show.
Not only Kale, but even the High Elves guarding the city began to feel a sense of superiority.
It had to be said that the Trolls had put in a lot of effort to attack the city.
The Horde had indeed left all the siege tools for the Trolls, but there were many things that the Trolls couldn't handle. For example, Golin's giant siege vehicles that were at least 10 to 8 meters tall. With these iron siege vehicles that looked like giant wheels, Silvermoon City's 15-meter-tall, seemingly tall city walls were as fragile as building blocks.
If it were the Trolls, they wouldn't even budge. The Trolls could only use some more conventional siege weapons.
Unfortunately, every time they got close to the city walls, Silvermoon City would open the gates and release the dogs. No, the arcane guards, to counterattack. Regardless of how many there were, the arcane guards worked well.
They looked intimidating enough.
The 4 Windrunner sisters and the Silvermoon Council members were also on the city walls.
If the Trolls dared to attack the city, the Elves would dare to massacre them. In any case, the Elves only defended and did not attack. They held out for 3 whole days.
On the morning of the 3rd day, it was time for the final battle.
Countless small teams of soldiers came out of Silvermoon City's barracks.
They quietly passed through the streets and alleys, forming a torrent. They practically filled all the streets, alleys, squares, and roads near the south gate of Silvermoon City. In the widest square, the most elite Imperial Guards were lined up in a few huge square formations. At the front of the square formation, there were 3 neat rows of arcane guards that were completely different from the previous 3 days.
They were bigger and more majestic.
In front of the arcane guards, there were a lot of thick armor with long steel spikes for collisions. The arcane guards had completely become war machines, and not the guards that the arcanists used to guard their homes. And the nimble elven rangers covered the roofs of almost all the houses on the side of the square.
Originally, none of the high-level elves approved of Kale, that's risky counterattack.
Even though the main orc force had left, there were still more than 50,000 trolls outside. Even more trolls heard the news and swarmed over from all over the Lordaeron continent to participate in this revenge against the High Elves. But when Duque secretly brought Anastrian and Kale, that's to a forest to the west of Silvermoon City, the Sunstrider father and son immediately understood Duque's intentions. The 800 Griffin Knights led by the Wildhammer Dwarf King, Kudrin, was the greatest insurance. If anything really happened, these Griffins could definitely come out at the critical moment to teach the trolls a lesson. Wasn't this kind of easy victory the best way to restore the reputation of the Sunstrider Wong family? Leaving a few trusted aides by Kudrin's side to act as liaisons and surveillance, the Sun King brazenly pushed for this great counterattack. Whoa! The rhythmic sound of the elven horn stunned Zhu Jin, who was preparing to attack the city. The gates of Silvermoon City opened once again. Unlike the previous few times, as if afraid that the trolls would take the opportunity to rush in, only one gate was opened. This time, all 7 gates were opened. Like water slowly overflowing a dam, the High Elves' torrent rushed out of Silvermoon City.
Every troll was dumbfounded. Chapter 398.
The first to bear the brunt were the modified arcane guards. The trolls began to doubt their eyes when they saw the arcane guards that were completely different from the elves. The elven arcane guard had soft curves all over its body. Apart from its huge fists, when the arcane guard was motionless, it looked like a huge sculpture. The modified arcane guards were filled with a primitive and barbaric style. Their arms, elbows, shoulders, chests, calves, and knees were all covered with hard steel spikes that were at least half a meter long or sharp crescent-shaped blades. He had completely become a killing machine. The arcane constructs at the very front completely ignored all of the trolls' projectiles. The metal javelins and catapults bounced off as soon as they hit the trolls. The hammer-dismantling Gundam, that had worked thousands of times before, could not find a place to attack now. A few brave trolls charged forward, but the charging elves did not even spare them a glance. Every elf stared at the trolls as if they were idiots. That was the truth. The sledgehammers were stuck in the dense spikes of the arcane guards. It was wishful thinking to hit the joints. As a result, the trolls were directly hit by the arcane guards. They were definitely lucky to be sent flying, with a few broken ribs and vomiting blood. The ones who suffered the most were those who were nailed to the calves of the arcane guards like pieces of beef waiting to be barbecued. They were neither dead nor alive. The trolls' powerful healing ability made them unable to die for a long time. Their bodies were hooked by the slightly curved spikes and could not be pulled out at all. With every step the arcane guard took, the wounds on his body tore open, and he let out a tragic wail. If the giant beast Gollin or the agile twin-headed ogre warriors were still here, they could at least rely on the brute force of these non-human monsters to forcefully resist the arcane guards with their strength and heavy weapons. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. The trolls were generally more than 2 meters tall. In front of these huge magical and mechanical creatures, they were as laughable as ants. No, Zhu Jin's subordinate, Nararak, roared. As one of the best who had undergone the transformation of the Storm Altar, Nararak had obtained a transformation ability similar to that of a druid. With a roar that sounded like it came from ancient times, he turned into a giant bear that was more than 6 meters tall and weighed at least 5 tons. The giant bear was charging. It was an unscientific combat technique based on the warrior's charge skill. The huge and sharp bear claws dug a deep ravine on the ground that was deep enough to fit a person's calf. The huge and exaggerated figure left a stream of light on the ground. Wild assault. Using its extraordinarily thick fur, Nararak's bear paw smashed the spikes and blades on the arcane guard's body before smashing the arcane construct's joints. After the giant arcana guard collapsed, it seemed to be struggling to get up. In the blink of an eye, the giant bear had smashed the arcana technique core with its claws. On the city wall, Kale that's frowned. Duque's voice rang in the prince's ear. Let Soladre and Sagunnar go up with 2 healers. Send a team of elite rangers or mages to take care of the rest. Kale that's did as he was told, and the effect was immediate. Nararak, who had a particularly powerful impact, was immediately restrained. The prince's 2 strong hands were just in time to restrain Nararak. At this time, another troll that could summon hurricanes and lightning appeared. He was Eichelson, who had the resounding nickname of Eagle God. He destroyed 3 arcana guards with a powerful lightning strike, and then summoned hurricanes that easily swept away a large number of elven soldiers. Kale that's face twitched as he looked at the soldiers who were sent flying into the sky and blasted into charcoal by the terrifying lightning strike. Duque snapped his fingers and summoned Aurelia and Servanas. Duque's instructions were simple and violent. Stand in the eye of the storm and shoot everything that has nothing to do with the elves. On the battlefield, rescue was like putting out a fire. Every moment of delay was the loss of dozens of lives. The Windrunner sisters leaped from the top of the high city wall and glided into the battlefield. After 7 or 8 quick and agile jumps, they faced off against Eichelson. Next, a few of Zhu Jin's subordinates who had been strengthened by the Storm Altar acted for the first time. However, after a short period of viciousness, Duque gave the prince a few pointers, and those guys were restrained. At this time, the way Kale that's looked at Duque changed. Duque's foresight was not enough to describe Eichelson. His earth-shattering power of observation was not enough to describe him. The kind of penetrating power that could see through the enemy's weakness with a glance. This made Kale that's admire him greatly. A feeling of worship grew wildly in the heart of the Sunstrider prince. Kaisi, this is actually not a big deal. Actually, after Aurelia told me that Gul'dan destroyed the runestone, I rushed to the scene. After some research, I had already deduced 80% of the opponent's skills and strength, and had already thought of a countermeasure. The response I made after seeing it on the battlefield was just a supplement to what I've been thinking these past few days. I admire you. You don't need to admire me. You can do this too. As long as you are good at observation and thinking, you will be able to discover many things that you have been ignoring before. As long as you make more complete preparations than the enemy, the scales of victory will naturally tilt towards your side during the confrontation on the battlefield.
I have learned from you.
Kale that's bowed deeply to Xueqi. Xueqi gladly accepted it. The trolls had always been at a disadvantage when fighting against the elves. After the experts strengthened by the storm altar were restrained, the trolls were once again at their wits' end. The scattered spears thrown at the elven troops were mostly blocked by the ferocious arcane guards at the front. Less than 10% of the spears were thrown at the back. Even if a few elves fell occasionally, the soldiers at the back would immediately fill in the gaps. The enemies in front of them seemed endless, causing Xueqi to feel a sense of helplessness. In terms of numbers, the trolls definitely had the upper hand. However, when hundreds of arcane guards lined up in a row and pressed down with an earth-shattering momentum, it felt like the elves had become a true army. Although the trolls did not put down their weapons and escape, they could not help but retreat uncontrollably. They wanted to retreat from the plains in front of Silvery Moon back into the Long Song Forest. At least the complex terrain there could stop the huge arcane guards' charge. At least there, they did not need to face the astonishing momentum that could make the earth tremble. Chapter 399. The trolls are about to escape. Kale, that's reminded him. Taking the Amani trolls as an example, one of the reasons why the elves hadn't been able to exterminate them for thousands of years was that forest trolls were natural forest killers. This was especially true for someone like Xueqi. As long as he didn't want to be caught, he wouldn't be caught. As long as he didn't want to be caught, then even if the best rangers in Quel Salis were sent to hunt him down, they wouldn't be able to catch him. Before Xueqi's crazy and unreasonable Yao Yao army appeared, the war in the forest was a battle between trolls and elven rangers. For thousands of years, neither could completely overwhelm the other. Often, when there were too many trolls, they would rush out of the depths of the forest and seek death. When the trolls were killed, they would immediately scram back into the forest to recuperate. This kind of tug-of-war had been going on for thousands of years. Prince Kale, that's had also heard of the power of the Yao Yao. In terms of early warning, the Yao Yao was indeed powerful. Unfortunately, this annoying little fellow was too slow. In a full-speed pursuit, the Yao Yao was useless. Again, it was easy to break up and defeat trolls, but difficult to annihilate trolls. Compared to the sacrifice of nearly 200,000 soldiers and civilians, defeating a troll army that had lost the support of the orcs was far from enough to satisfy the elves' hatred. Kale, that was anxious. Xueqi shook his head leisurely. The way of a commander, in addition to looking at the overall situation and making the most beneficial choices for one's side, is to learn to read people and learn to wholeheartedly believe in experts who are proficient in certain areas. Experts? Everyone has their own strengths. Xueqi pointed at the fighting Sagunner. Brave and ruthless, the vanguard. Xueqi then pointed at Aurelia, who didn't forget to command and coordinate the four sides in the fierce battle. Able to fight and control, the general. Xueqi finally pointed at himself. Able to complete special tasks at special times and places, the specialist. With that, Xueqi chanted a string of incantations. When Kale that's first heard it, he instinctively felt that it was very familiar, because it was the incantation to activate the runestone array buried under Long Song Forest. However, when he listened carefully, he felt that something was amiss. From the middle part onwards, the incantation had been changed beyond recognition. Even if it was the same magical device, different incantations often corresponded to different effects. Kale, that's really didn't know how Xueqi knew about this incantation and how he modified it. The prince barely understood Duke's incantation in the language of the High Elves. He changed the word rise to sink, and deposit to release. However, more than 30% of the runestones had been destroyed, and most of the arcane energy buried under the forest had been used up. What else could Xueqi do? In Kale, that's expectations, it would be difficult to even make a fire with a runestone magic circle, let alone a flame that could incinerate 10,000 people. At this moment, in Xueqi's perception, the situation was completely different. Lines of data flowed down from Xueqi's retina like a waterfall, pouring into Xueqi's vision and imprinting in Xueqi's mental world at the same time. A large amount of knowledge poured into Xueqi's head like a force-feeding duck. This should have been a very uncomfortable process, but when all the knowledge was crushed into fragments of memories and continuously rotated at high speed, like rivers flowing into the sea, everything changed. Importing geological data of Long Song Forest, comparing the geological conditions of the battlefield, feeding back the magic conditions into a data link, loading the strongest king terrain modification system. Authority, supreme. Kale, that's who was beside Xueqi, watched in astonishment as Xueqi's pupils gradually changed from deep black to the color of flowing mercury. A series of magic waves gradually appeared under his feet, as if the magic circuit on his body extended from his limbs to the city wall, and then from the city wall to the entire battlefield. How is this possible? Kale, that's cried out in shock. As the ancestors of magic, the biggest difference between the High Elves and the city wall was that they solidified the city wall of Silvermoon City with magic to prevent the wall from collapsing under the effects of high temperatures and low temperatures. Even the Sun King himself, who had built the city wall back then, could not allow his magic to pass through the city wall. This was because the city wall had been reinforced and solidified many times with magic. However, Xueqi did it. Boom! The large area where the trolls stood seemed to have experienced an incomparably violent earthquake. Suddenly, the entire area shook. Standing on the high city wall, Kale, that's and a few counselors of the Silver Moon Council could see the entire battlefield even more clearly. It was as if an indomitable giant beast had chomped down on the area behind the troll. A huge crescent-shaped area suddenly sank by a full 5 meters. No, it's not just 5 meters. It was as if the shapeless behemoth was biting down again, making the 3-kilometer-long semicircular pit even deeper. Boom! There was another loud noise. Every time a loud noise came from the ground, the crack would expand, deepen, and widen. No troll knew how deep the dark trench was, but it was already more than 30 meters wide. No. The trolls were horrified to find that their escape route had been cut off. Before entering the forest again, they first had to face the huge trench that could not be crossed by themselves. At this moment, Xueqi smiled. Kale, please. Use your flames to make the trolls jump into the trench and go to hell. Kale, that's eyes widened. He suddenly realized that this was the hunt that Xueqi was talking about. Without hesitation, Kale, that's activated all the magic circuits in his body. His entire body rose into the air and burst forth with a strong light that was enough to dazzle the eyes of every warrior on the battlefield. The power of the flames that flowed out of Kale, that's body was too terrifying. In just a few breaths, he turned into a huge and illusory fire phoenix. This huge creature that was burning with flames slowly floated down from the city wall. It pounced on its flame wings that were wider than the main gate of Silvermoon City. Every time it flapped its wings, it swept up blazing turbulence. Kale, that's did not even have to attack. Just the power of the flames that flowed out was already like a flaming storm that could destroy half of the forest. The High Elves watched as their prince flew over their heads with a ferocious might that could overturn the entire battlefield. They immediately burst into loud cheers that could overturn the clouds in the sky. Long live the Sunstrider! Long live His Highness Kale, that's. Kale, that's activated all the magic circuits in his body, and the various magic treasures of the Sunstrider royal family on his body immediately shone brightly. He pushed his palms forward, and a wall of fire that was more than 2 kilometers wide appeared on the battlefield. Chapter 400. Xueqi was also dumbfounded. He had never expected that Kale, that would be able to create such an exaggerated and insane wall of fire with his full strength. No, this was no longer a wall of fire. This wall of fire that could move forward should be called Wave of Fire. Ordinary earth mages couldn't cast Wave of Fire. Sky mages could probably create a wave of fire that was 20 meters wide in a short period of time. Xueqi calculated his limit and estimated that he wouldn't be able to withstand a width of 200 meters. That's right, a Morning Star mage could indeed act as a small nuclear reactor and produce magic power on their own. But just as its name suggested, it was only at the level of the light of the stars. Considering that Kai Z was only a radiant moon, according to the estimation given by the system notification, it would be impressive for Kale, that's to create a wave of fire that was 500 meters wide at most. Now that it was 2 kilometers wide, even if it was a short-term spell, it wasn't hard to imagine that the amount of magic and mental strength needed to control the spell was astronomical. Without a large pile of top-notch epic magic equipment, it was impossible to survive. As expected of a nouveau riche. No, it should be said, as expected of an imperial family. The wealth of the Sunstrider Wang family, which had been passed down for nearly 7,000 years, was indeed unimaginable to outsiders. Any low-grade item that they didn't even bother with was enough to cause a civil war among the Dalian pharaoh outside. Second-generation Wang. Let's be good friends. Of course, Xueqi, who called himself an honest and reliable gentleman, would never have any ideas about Kale. Well, it was another matter when he thought about how he had cleared Kai Zi's dungeon countless times before he transmigrated. The trolls below were miserable. No one would have thought that the runestone array could be used in this way. The runestone itself could raise a huge tornado of wind and thunder anywhere in the Longsong forest, killing all the creatures inside. Xueqi did the exact opposite. When he was unable to gather the power of wind and lightning, he directly drew more power from the earth vein. A dried-up ley line could easily form a huge underground hole. There wasn't a problem at first. But not long ago, this place had been tormented by all kinds of huge beastmen war machines, and Xueqi had drained the veins of the earth, causing the earth to lose its support. Then, under the system's calculations, it became a perfect trap. Now, all Kale that's had to do was force these trolls into a trap. Raging flames swept across the entire battlefield plains. The flames caused the surrounding temperature to rise, and the temperature of the air was greatly increased. Putting aside the sparks that were constantly flying in the turbulent flow, the air was so hot that even breathing it in would cause severe burns. Once the flame landed on any flammable object, it would immediately burst into flames. Under Kale, control, the fire burned everything in its path. A distant memory surfaced in the hearts of every troll. They suddenly realized that they were just like their ancestors, mercilessly driven away by the magic elves. They left the land they stood on, left the homes they lived in, and walked step by step towards death and destruction. The raging flames reminded them of the burned capital of the Amani Empire. "Ah!" the trolls screamed in terror. This scream was like that of their ancestors, filled with panic and despair. "No, it can't be like this." Zhu Jin frantically urged the power of his wind, trying to use it to fight against Kale, flames. At this moment, without Kale, reminder, more elven powerhouses took action. The astromancer Caponia merged her flames into Kale, flames. Kale, chief astromancer Solarian did the same thing. It wasn't just them. More members of the Silver Moon Council joined the battle, encouraging this huge wave of fire to sweep toward the trolls. Boom, boom, boom. The raging flames roasted everything. This wall of raging flames reminded the trolls of the distant Dark Age, which was passed down by word of mouth from their ancestors. At that time, a forest fire could often destroy a troll clan. Now, this fear was pressing into the depths of the hearts of every troll on the battlefield. They kept retreating because they were afraid of the flames and falling off the cliff. Nearly 50,000 trolls huddled together along the long and deep ravine. All the trolls' hearts constricted from fear, and the screams of their companions in the face of death deepened the chaos of the team. Some trolls began to be pushed down into the deep ravine. This unlucky troll waved his limbs in horror. Blood gushed out from all over his body, and his vision instantly turned from a blazing light to a pitch-black darkness. He unconsciously opened his mouth, letting the wind rush into his lungs as he fell. After falling for an unknown number of seconds, he lost consciousness under the impact of an indescribably violent force. "Ah!" Shrill cries came from the deep darkness, echoing continuously, making it impossible for them to judge how deep this ravine was. Panic spread further. The wave of fire was getting closer and closer. Some trolls recklessly rushed into the wave of fire, trying to rush through it to vent their final anger on the elves. But after a few steps, their bodies were charred black and turned into charcoal, kneeling in the flames. More trolls were pushed down into the ravine in panic and chaos. On the city wall, countless highborn elves who stayed behind pressed their chests excitedly, and their fair faces flushed with excitement. They stared at this scene, afraid to miss any detail. This was the end of the hateful trolls. This was the end of the trolls who had slaughtered their compatriots, their loved ones, and deserved to die 1,000 times. And at this moment, their great prince, Kale Sunstrider, had avenged them. They shouted crazily, unable to control themselves. Many highborn elves had already taken over the wave of fire, and Kale, finally put down his biggest burden. He summoned his phoenix mount, Ao, and stood in the air above the battlefield in a hovering posture. Subconsciously, he looked back at Xueqi, who was standing on the city wall. Xueqi was very calm. His pitch-black and deep eyes were like the endless starry sky, with an indifference that could decide the life and death of millions of living beings. Xueqi calmly watched the entire battlefield, but it gave Kale, that's the illusion that the entire Qul Salis was under Xueqi's control. Surprisingly, Kale that's didn't feel any fear or unease. On the contrary, Kale, that's actually had a feeling that the people might have a better life if the country was handed over to Xueqi. He didn't dare to tell anyone about this feeling. Because this feeling was definitely not what a crown prince who was going to control the entire country in the future should have. Kale that smiled and waved at Xueqi, but all the elves thought that the prince was waving at them. Immediately, a tsunami of cheers sounded. Chapter 401. Zhu Jin's eyes were bloodshot. He was so angry and so regretful. Why had he been able to defeat the high elves so smoothly before? Why had his 50,000 trolls been beaten like dogs after the orcs' main force left? Zhu Jin didn't know what Xueqi curse was. He only knew that he had done something that would make the trolls of Lordaeron unable to recover for more than a decade. Ancestor Amani, I should have trusted Orgrim. Zhu Jin roared as he fought with all his might. More and more powerful high elves besieged him. Unfortunately, he realized this too late. Prince Kale, that's, Zhu Jin remembered this name purely because he was prepared to make the high elf prince's head part of his collection. Now, the owner of those eyes was looking down at him from above. The huge bird-shaped elemental creature under the prince seemed to cover half the sky. The crimson flames under its wings kept flapping, stirring up golden-red clouds of fire. The golden things that floated down from the sky like stars were actually the phoenix's spontaneously burning tail feathers. It was these feather-shaped golden lights that poured down, turning Haraz, who had transformed into a lynx, into a dead cat. His cat-shaped corpse turned into charcoal and lay in a sea of fire. The earth was burning, and so were the trolls' corpses, making creaking sounds. That was the sound of the flames burning the fat in the body. The Amani trolls were finished. The moss-flecked trolls were finished. Almost all the forest troll clans in Lordaeron had suffered heavy losses. Go! All of you go! Zhu Jin roared, ordering his elite subordinates to leave as soon as possible. Warlock Lord Malokas shouted, Chief, what about you? I can't go. If you don't go, you'll all die. Zhu Jin suddenly roared and transformed. First up was Xueqi. He summoned a dozen or so giant tornadoes that were dozens of meters tall, and forcefully withstood the flames of the two astromancers. He forced his way through the waves of fire and charged toward the elves' main formation. These weren't ordinary tornadoes. There was a strange turbulent flow of energy in the wind. Energy turbulence. This strange power was similar to the mage's magic counter. However, magic counter could at most disrupt the stability of arcane energy and stop a mage from casting spells, but energy disturbance was completely different. The two astromancers were still able to cast powerful spells, but every time they cast a spell, they would suffer from the backlash of the turbulent energy. To their surprise, they discovered that Zhu Jin's power could penetrate most of their external defensive spells and hit the magic shields that were closest to their bodies. The two female arcane masters were taken aback. Sasha! Xueqi ordered softly. Windrunners all three immediately flew forward to intercept Zhu Jin. Although the eagle could summon strong winds, this form was a form that was completely against spellcasters. Sasha's high affinity with the wind allowed her graceful figure to easily move through the seemingly irregular tornadoes, dealing considerable damage to the eagle-shaped ancestral metal that was flying towards her at high speed. Humph! Zhu Jin spat. He transformed from a male eagle to a dragon eagle. Don't assume that both of them were eagles. They were actually two completely different life forms. The dragon eagle Zhu Jin no longer used tornadoes. Instead, he summoned huge pillars of flames and bombarded toward Sasha. Sasha was in a sorry state. Dealing with powerful spells was not her forte. However, at this moment, Prince Kale that's made his move. Like a god of fire descending from the sky, Kale that's landed on the empty space between Zhu Jin and the elven army on his phoenix. His mount Eo merely flapped its wings and made all the flames within a radius of several hundred meters obey its command. They obediently and humbly lay on the ground. Zhu Jin's pupils suddenly contracted. From the twitching muscles at the corner of his eyes, one could tell how menacing his expression was under the mask. Let me show you my new style. Fangs and claws. Zhu Jin transformed again. This time he was a mountain cat. Zhu Jin actually attempted to circle around Kale, and continue killing towards the elven army. Everyone knew that the mountain cat form was definitely a high-speed form. If Zhu Jin was allowed to break through the defense and kill his way into the High Elves formation, there would definitely be a lot of casualties. For a moment, Kale didn't have any good ideas about Zhu Jin. He had wanted to create a wall of flames with extremely high temperatures, but at this moment, Duke's magic message arrived. Firemen. Firemen. A special type of fire magic. Simply put, it was to condense the flames into human shapes and then let the running firemen run to the enemy and self-destruct. This wasn't a mainstream type of magic because it was too inefficient. For most mages, rather than waiting for the firemen to run over, it was more practical to just throw a fireball. Either way, these two types of magic needed to be guided, or they wouldn't be able to hit the target. Any high-level mage with common sense would instinctively reject Duke's suggestion. Kale did as he was told. It was purely because he blindly worshipped and followed Duke. When dozens of firemen appeared behind Kale, a miracle happened. It seemed that the cat's unique dirty hands were acting up, or it seemed that after activating a certain skill, even Zhu Jin couldn't control his movements. The cat that Zhu Jin had transformed into, Mountain Cat, actually scratched those firemen. Bang, bang, bang. A series of dozens of huge explosions blew Zhu Jin up, and the huge mountain cat flew out. What's going on? No one could understand. Anyway, Prince Kale had the upper hand, and everyone just cheered. Huge waves of cheers came one after another. Zhu Jin finally turned into a giant bear, attempting to resist the prince's flames and charge towards the elven army. This was obviously futile. The prince was never afraid of a head-on confrontation. He was afraid that you would slip away and disappear. 12 huge fireballs surrounded Kale, at the 12 o'clock position. With a light turn of his arm, 12 consecutive fireballs blasted towards Zhu Jin. Boom, boom, boom. Zhu Jin resisted with all his might. Unfortunately, he didn't last long under the crazy bombardment of the next elven king. 30 seconds later, the outcome of this massive battle was decided. Zhu Jin let out a wail as he was blasted away by Kale. That's like a high-flying ball. His huge bear-shaped body dissolved in midair, and finally turned into a human form as he fell. The impact of his fall was so great that he even smashed an arcane guard in an instant. However, the spikes in front of the arcane guard didn't make him feel any better, causing Zhu Jin to turn into a bloody man at the same time as he destroyed it. Dozens of elven soldiers went up and quickly tied up Zhu Jin. Chapter 402. The sound of Zhu Jin hitting the arcane guards was so loud that the entire ground seemed to let out a cry of pain at that moment. However, this was the last sound of battle on the battlefield. Apart from a few troll powerhouses who had been strengthened by the storm altar and used the power of wind to fly across the huge crack in the ground, 99% of the trolls were left behind. In the huge crack, the groans of the trolls could still be heard. It was conceivable that there wouldn't be too many trolls that survived, nor too few. The incomparably strong vitality of the trolls meant that as long as their heads and hearts weren't destroyed, they would be able to heal themselves perfectly. This wasn't important. The trolls in the crack had nowhere to escape. After they climbed out, what awaited them was death. Duque floated down from the top of the city wall with slow fall, landed accurately in front of Kale, and extended his hand to the elven prince. Congratulations, Your Highness Kale, This is a perfect counterattack. Looks like I can save my people a few hundred kilometers, Duque said loudly. His voice so loud that hundreds of people around him could hear him clearly. If the elves had suffered hundreds of casualties in exchange for the destruction of 50,000 trolls before the war with the Horde, the High Elves would definitely have shown Duque what it meant to be high. That kind of arrogant attitude of superiority couldn't be suppressed at all. Now, anyone with a bit of brains knew that this was purely Duque hanging the last fig leaf for the glory of the High Elves. A day ago, the High Elves who had been beaten like dogs were hiding in their main city. Even their last magical defense array had been broken by the Horde. They were like a young girl in thin clothes waiting helplessly in a corner to be ravaged by their enemies. Duque had made a dazzling appearance. The awe-inspiring might of repelling thousands of troops with one flag told the High Elves about the changes in the outside world, and also how terrifying Duque's power was. If not for Duque scaring away the main force of the Horde with the orcs as the core, The elves wouldn't have been able to take revenge on the trolls. If they hadn't resolved the siege as soon as possible, how could the scattered elven soldiers and civilians who were temporarily hiding in various parts of the Longsong Forest escape the ferocious extermination of the trolls? Moreover, after losing 70,000 troops, the elves could no longer straighten their backs. Kale. That was also very straightforward. He bowed to Xueqi on the spot. No, no, no. This is all thanks to your full support, Xueqi. We were able to cross the gates of hell and return to this world. Xueqi knew how to conduct himself, and Kale, knew how to conduct himself even better. Naturally, both the host and the guest were happy. Next up was cleaning up the battlefield and sweeping up the scattered giant demons. Aside from sending out a large number of demon spirits, Xueqi had nothing else to do. The cracks created by the runestone formation were almost 40 meters deep. This was a terrifying height for mortals. Most of the trolls who were forced to fall by the flames fell to their deaths. There were still quite a few giant demons who managed to avoid death by falling onto their companions. Of course, the elves would not let them go. Under Du Zhe's instigation, they poured things like kerosene into the fire and burned those who were still alive. The healing power of the giant demons was useless in front of the flames. In fact, Xueqi really wanted the elves to attack from both sides and destroy Orgrim's elite troops in Xueqi. Unfortunately, while the elves complained about the heavy losses and the lack of troops to maintain order in the country, most of them were scared out of their wits. Didn't they see the wild hammer dwarves coming out in full force? The elves refused to move. Xueqi still had to move. Even if it was not the right time to fight Orgrim, he could at least not let him act recklessly. Xueqi called for Qudrin Wildhammer and his Griffin Knights to chase in the direction of the horde's retreat. Wait! I'm going too! Aurelia whistled. Under the stunned gazes of Xueqi and the dwarves, a group of rangers mounted the Griffin's back. Damn it! What if a battle breaks out? Qudrin protested loudly. Then I'll trouble you to drop us near the top of the tree. A Windwalker ranger who didn't fall to his death in the forest. Savannahs shouted loudly. Aurelia hugged Xueqi's waist from behind. Thank you for solving the giant demon crisis, but I don't know why, but I'm a little worried about what Orgrim will do. This was exactly what Xueqi was worried about. Running away like a dog with its tail between its legs was not the style of the beast men. The Griffin's speed was very fast. Flying at full speed at 70 to 80 kilometers per hour was not a problem. Of course, considering the Griffin's endurance and food supply, flying at 60 kilometers per hour was the most ideal. If the Griffin really flew at full speed, he would need to at least get a whole cow to replenish it. Where would he find 1,000 cows in Xueqi? That evening, when he saw the light in the distance reaching the horizon, Xueqi's worst prediction appeared: a fire in the Longsong Forest. It was the middle of summer, the time when forest fires were most likely to happen. From afar, dozens of flames could be seen rising from the southern part of the Longsong Forest. Obviously, this was not a natural fire at all. Orgrim, you bastard! Aurelia's pretty face was filled with anger and sorrow, and within a few breaths, her tears were all over her face. Not only her, but all the elves in Xueqi's vision also showed expressions of grief and despair. Xueqi was silent. As a transmigrator from a metropolis, he might never learn the ranger's love for nature. He also could not understand the grief they felt after the forest was burned, as if they had lost their loved ones. It was obvious that the horde had left after the fight with the giant demons last night. But after Orgrim had the horde march slightly out of the Longsong Forest, he aimed at the direction of the wind and set fire. The more densely packed areas were obviously the work of the wolf riders, and it could be seen that the fires were more concentrated. If he wasn't wrong, it would be the work of Zuluhid's red dragon. The rolling flames swept across the front of the forest like a huge wave. The intense heat evaporated every trace of moisture in the air, and the forest swayed like a mirage under the light of the setting sun. There were many black spots swaying back and forth in the sky, spitting out long beams of light. There was no need to guess, those were the wyverns. Although the lush Longsong Forest did not lack rain in the summer, and the trees had just been soaked by the rain, they were instantly burned to ashes by the blazing hot dragon breath. The thick black smoke, coupled with the darkness of the night, began to block the sun. The flames showed no signs of stopping, and followed the hot summer wind to engulf the trees further away. Although it was not enough to destroy them instantly, it was enough to set them ablaze. The fire spread endlessly in all directions, engulfing one tree after another. It was like a plague that was spreading at high speed. Chapter 403. Almost all the griffins let out sharp screeches when the heat wave from the fire hit them head-on. Even though they were the strongest in the sky, griffins were still instinctively afraid of fire. No, it should be said that this was the instinct of most creatures. Fly to the west. The leader of the wild hammer dwarves, Xueqi, quickly made a hand signal. Only about half of the griffin knights reacted and flew sideways with Xueqi. A considerable number of griffins had to hover or fly back to find a way out. When Xueqi flew to the west where the air was slightly fresher, he pulled the reins of the griffins and let them hover gently, giving him and Aurelia enough time and space to watch the terrible disaster in front of them. It was different from when Xueqi burned down the elven forest. At that time, the elven forest was completely occupied by the enemy, and humans did not have as many thoughts as the elves. But now it was different. When Xueqi squinted his eyes to reduce the strong light entering his eyes, Aurelia unconsciously tightened her grip on Xueqi. It was a strength that was far above that of Xueqi's. The strength of her arm was so strong that it felt like it could squeeze Xueqi's internal organs out. "Quick, stop this fire!" She shouted as if she had gone crazy and shook Xueqi's body forcefully. "Xueqi, aren't you omnipotent? Hurry up and stop this damn fire." "I can't do anything." Xueqi really wanted to say that. He was not a druid, nor was he the Virgin Mary, nor was he a savior. He was just a mage who was more good at destruction than creation. But listening to the mournful trembling in Aurelia's voice, Xueqi only felt that his heart was also broken. The giant dragons were like playing bats, hovering low in the sky in front of them. Wherever they passed, there was a raging fire spreading. Perhaps these red dragons were unwilling to listen to the orcs' control at first, but as time passed, it was clear that some of the red dragons also accepted this identity. Under the orcs' guidance, they released the tyranny in their hearts. In his field of vision, half of Xueqi was burning. The flames and smoke were like a cage of destruction, tightly enveloping the home of the high elves. Like the god of death, the flames spread from the foot of the mountain to the foot of the other mountain. It turned the places it touched into the fiercest red flames, and behind it, a remnant of darkness that was left after the flames had been completely burned. Xueqi was sure that even Silvery Moon City could see the fire. This was revenge. This was Orgrim's revenge. Just like how he burned the elven forest and left the horde behind. Now, Orgrim was using the same method to pay back what Xueqi had done to the horde. Xueqi's perfect strategy was now filled with pain and regret. At this moment, it was Aurelia who was begging him. "Xueqi, I'm sorry. I don't want to force you, but I'm just a ranger. I can't deal with this fire." Aurelia leaned her head on Xueqi's shoulder, and Xueqi saw tears flowing down her cheeks from the corner of his eye. "But I have to stop it. Because the forest of Xueqi is my home." Xueqi could not refuse. "I'll try my best." After saying this, Xueqi blew a small horn, the signal he had agreed with Xueqi. Xueqi raised his warhammer high and roared, "Little ones, put down our guests. We'll take care of those big lizards. Tell them who's the master of the sky." Oh, the griffin riders had their griffins slow down and fly low. Then, like dumplings being dropped into a pot, they had the agile rangers jump onto the treetops of the various trees. Finally, they formed into a formation and began to charge forward. Even though they knew that this would be accompanied by sacrifices, Xueqi directly jumped down, because he saw a river a few hundred meters away from the front of the fire. The river was about 5 meters wide, and the water was quite turbulent. The system genie appeared. "Host, I have to warn you that what you're doing is meaningless. The chance of you completely extinguishing this fire is 0.00001%. There are some things that don't have to be done for sure." Xueqi replied in a deep voice. "Sometimes, people will do things that have no real meaning, just to make themselves feel better." "I'm sorry, host. I don't understand what you're saying." Xueqi did not continue to answer. He directly cast a spell. After a short acceleration, the 3 magic circuits in his body operated to the extreme. Sky mages could absorb elemental energy from the entire sky to strengthen their own magic. Morning stars could use this as a foundation to produce magic on a small scale. Because of the high temperature, the river had already begun to boil. The temperature of the fire was too high, and simply pouring water on it would instantly evaporate. What Xueqi did was not simply use water to extinguish the fire. Instead, he first extracted the fire elemental energy from the entire area. Absorb, absorb and absorb again. Compress, compress, and compress again. Then, a huge fireball that had never been seen before emerged from Xueqi's palm like a mushroom cloud. The huge fireball was launched into the sky, and after rising more than 200 meters, it began to quickly dissipate because there was nothing left to burn. After extracting the fire elemental energy, the temperature of the air within a radius of several hundred meters in front of Xueqi plummeted, and some areas even had frost covering the ground, which was out of season.
Xueqi. Good job. On the griffin, Aurelia unskillfully controlled Xueqi's griffin.
But very soon, whether it was her sisters, or even the rangers she brought, they all began to fall silent.
Xueqi was very powerful.
By running at high speed and extracting the power of the fire elemental energy in a large area, and then replacing it with water elemental energy, he successfully contained a large area of forest from fire. However, his power alone was still too insignificant.
So what if he prevented a 2 or 3 kilometer area from being burned?
In just a short 10 minutes, the fire had already spread for hundreds of kilometers. If it wasn't for the wild hammer dwarves griffin riders in the distance, the area of the fire would have been even larger and more terrifying.
In the distance, the winner of the massive battle that erupted in mid-air was quickly determined.
In terms of aerial combat, the griffin, which was only above average, was at an absolute disadvantage against the red dragon, which was the tyrant in the sky.
The wild hammer dwarves used absolute numbers to make up for their lack of individual quality. According to what Xueqi said, the red dragons would run away on their own after dealing with the orc riders. It was obvious that the tribe had used some kind of threat or method to force the red dragons. Now, even if the riders behind the red dragons died, they would still choose to continue fighting until they received the order to retreat. Xueqi had no choice but to give the order to kill these red dragons as well. After being continuously hit by the storm warhammer, the red dragons finally could not hold on any longer. They howled and fell from mid-air, their bodies covered in wounds. The battle was over. Chapter 404. In fact, Orgrim, who was unwilling to accept defeat, did something else. He sent Zulahid's dragon knights to attack the Sun Well. Unfortunately, they returned without success. The Battle of Quel'Thalas was over. Hastily. The invading trolls were completely annihilated. Apart from a few chief-level trolls who managed to escape with the help of the Storm Altar, not even a single egg was left. Even the troll chieftain, Xueqi, was captured. Xueqi was even worse off. A preliminary count of 80,000 soldiers and 200,000 civilians died. A third of the precious Longsong forest was burned down, and this was with the help of the heavens. Otherwise, it was unknown what would have happened. On the Alliance's side, the human army under Xueqi's command went on an armed march. With the support of the Yao Yao, they did not fight the horde at all. On the other hand, the wild hammer dwarves had a fierce battle with the Dragon Maw clan's red dragon knights. Xueqi and his mount, Scare, had shocked everyone. The wild hammer king had killed 9 red dragons by himself. The sentries that Xueqi had prepared in the north were not put to use either. When they retreated from Xueqi, the orcs split up. This also originated from the Sun Well.
We can't even fight our way in,
Zulahid complained to Orgrim. It seemed like his anger was far greater than his guilt at his own incompetence. Even the dragons can't do it. Orgrim narrowed his eyes and listened attentively. Zulahid emphasized loudly, shaking his head forcefully. I had my dragons spit out the last drop of saliva in their mouths to create dragon breath. Their flames have already enveloped the entire city. But so what? We are like fools roasting a rock. No matter how fierce the fire outside is, it will never reach the inside. I tried to let them charge in, but their claws were blocked by an invisible barrier. That's the Sun Well.
Gul'dan interrupted Zulahid.
It is the source of magic for the elves. It provides them with endless energy. Fortunately, you did not really charge in. Otherwise, the elves with the Sun Well could cast almost limitless spells and smash 1,000 fireballs into your face. Zulahid was speechless. Orgrim, on the other hand, was deep in thought. Looks like I was right not to attack Silvery Moon. Even if the horde gathered 100,000 people, it wouldn't be enough to take down Silver Moon City. They would have to deal with the Alliance first before they could take down the stronghold.
However, putting aside the elves for now did not mean that they would not have to deal with them in the future. The elves' large-scale magic formations gave Orgrim, who only knew how to fight in melee combat, a headache. Especially after knowing that there was a sun well further north of Silvermoon City. To conquer this world, be it the elves' Silvermoon City or the Well of the Sun, they would always be a hurdle that could not be avoided. Is there a way to destroy it or exhaust its energy? Or can we control it instead? Or use the storm altar to destroy their defenses? Orgrim asked Gul'dan 3 questions in a row. A sly smile appeared on Gul'dan's face. I don't know. I'm willing to try, but I don't know what the Sunwell will be like. The storm altar was made of runestones unique to the elves, and their energy originated from the Sunwell. I can try to connect to the source of its energy through them and transfer my magic power over to destroy it or control it. But Great Chief, this will take time, a lot of time. If he really succeeded, whether it was destruction or control, Orgrim didn't even need to think to know which one Gul'dan would choose. From the bottom of his heart, Doomhammer did not want Gul'dan to control this power. However, rather than leaving the power of the Sunwell to the elves who could cast mysterious magic beyond the beastman's imagination, it was better to give it to Gul'dan. After all, Gul'dan was a beastman. It was obvious that if they were to retreat, Gul'dan would not have enough time to do all sorts of research. Seeing Orgrim's wavering, Gul'dan decided to add fuel to the fire. He humbly lowered his head. Great Chief, we cannot just leave like this. I actually have another plan for the Storm Altar. It will help the tribe to speed up the pace of conquering. I believe that it will be more beneficial for the tribe if my clan and I stay here for a while. Gul'dan used a low voice to tempt Orgrim. Orgrim furrowed his brows. He never trusted this short, ugly, and evil warlock. However, the pressure that the humans and high elves put on the tribe was too great. He had no choice but to use Gul'dan. Without the warlock, the tribe's warriors would only be like the trolls, tragically and helplessly falling under the powerful magic. He also had to admit that Gul'dan's twin-headed ogres played an important role in the Battle of Xueqi. It was these strengthened ogres and golems' breakthrough that completely defeated the elves' giant arcane guards. According to the latest news, the humans had created something that could spit fire. There was nothing the valiant Grom Hellscream could do about it. The twin-headed ogre mages were different. They could use Ice Barrier while charging through the flames. It was not hard to imagine that without their help, the tribe would lose the ability to break through the Alliance's defense line. After thinking about it, Orgrim finally nodded. Do what you must. Still worried, he added to Gul'dan, but don't delay for too long. We need to concentrate our forces to quickly take down Lordaeron. After the Beastmen entered the world of Azeroth through the Dark Portal, the humans had gotten through the initial period of discomfort and repeated failures. They had shown great resilience. There were all sorts of new tactics and weapons against the Beastmen. If they still used the same method that the Blackhand Great Chief used when they first arrived in this world, it would not take long for the Beastmen to go extinct. The humans were improving, and the Beastmen had to improve as well. When they reached the northern continent of the Eastern Kingdom, which was also the Lordaeron continent, Orgrim realized that the things he had to do had changed a lot. He began to pay more attention to information. If they had enough information, the tribe wouldn't have foolishly attacked one city after another. They would also not foolishly attack the farthest Elven Kingdom just to get the trolls as an ally. The 8 countries had only attacked Stormwind City. If they attacked the other cities one by one, how long would that take? Orgrim decided to change the tribe's plan and attack the Lordaeron Kingdom directly. I won't delay for too long, Gul'dan assured Orgrim. Gul'dan assured Orgrim and grinned. If it really doesn't work, I'll make another storm altar to strengthen it and the army will come. Chapter 405. Orgrim took away almost all of the 2-headed ogres and Gollin, but he did not see Gul'dan and his Storm Predator clan or Gugur's Twilight Hammer clan. After wandering in the mountains for 3 days, Orgrim decided to change the route of the march. He bypassed the northern sentinels and returned to the north of the hinterlands from the original settlement of the Mossy Troll clan. He was prepared to attack Lordaeron through a route that no one in the Alliance could have imagined. Xueqi should have responded immediately. However, the rapid march over the past few days made Xueqi's troops quite tired. He could only order a 3-day rest. At this time, the High Elves held a banquet. Yes, A celebration banquet to celebrate the victory against the invaders. When he first heard the news, Xueqi felt like he was in shock. Celebration? What celebration? 300,000 high elves died, and almost 1/3 of the high elves perished. They only killed 50,000 trolls, and they still had the cheek to call themselves the victors of the war? Sorry. It is precisely because our losses were too heavy that Father and all the counselors agreed to hold a grand banquet to celebrate the victory and raise the morale of the people. Kale that said to Xueqi with an apologetic expression, almost begging. Also, this will be the signing ceremony for Xueqi Salas to officially join the Lordaeron alliance. Since it was an official joining, Xueqi, as the highest representative of the alliance, naturally had to attend. That feeling was like asking you to eat a fly. Do you want it fresh? Or do you want it original? They had already been beaten like a dog, yet they still wanted to pretend to be peaceful and show off their power. Wanting to save face and suffering was the best way to describe Quell Dorii, high elves, but the ones who suffered were the civilians. Beside him, Elucia quietly tugged at the corner of Xueqi's clothes. Xueqi finally swallowed his anger and nodded in agreement. After waiting for Kale that's to leave, Elucia sighed and said, Sorry Xueqi, I know you are not used to it yet. To be honest, I grew up in a high noble family, and I am still not used to it. The decrease in the number of subjects and the burning of the territory will only mean a decrease in income. As long as the country is not destroyed, everything can be restarted. This is the way of thinking of the nobles. I understand. Xueqi didn't hide his disgust for the Elven Council and the nobles. Sometimes, Xueqi even felt that the first, second, or third war at the Dark Portal might be a good thing. Without so many foreign enemies to clean up these terrible people, Azeroth would still be a rotten and hopeless world. Xueqi felt very conflicted. At night, it was not yet time for the celebration banquet. Carriages pulled by beautifully decorated chocobos had filled every space in the square of the Sun Chaser Royal Court. Before seeing so many noble carriages, Xueqi would never have imagined that Xueqi Salas had so many nobles. Each of the chocobos had been groomed until their feathers shone brightly, like proud phoenixes, raising their heads high and exuding a cold aura. One by one, elves dressed like the nobles of Stormwind stood in front of the carriages. Their clothes were luxurious and elegant, studded with gold and silver ornaments with magical effects, giving them the most elegant presence. If Elucia hadn't whispered it, Xueqi wouldn't have known that these guys were just freaking coachmen. Coachman Earl Sai? Nobles of Stormwind. Do you want me to buy a box of tofu and let you drown yourselves? This extreme luxury caused Xueqi to be dumbstruck. The Sunstrider Royal Court, which was decorated in the palace style of the Sunstrider royal family, was ablaze with lights. The bright magic lights made the palace, which was filled with round towers and was mainly colored in white, red, and gold, look splendid. Crossing a huge red carpet that was more than 20 meters wide, Xueqi let Elucia, who was attending as a female companion, hold his hand as they slowly walked up the steps. Stepping on the neat white jade stone tiles, Xueqi couldn't help but look up at the exquisite female elven statues on both sides of the stairs. These statues were either literary or martial, and with lifelike carving lines and passionate movements, they eulogized the greatness of the Sun Chaser Royal Court. They arrived at the entrance of the hall. Kale, that had changed into a very festive robe and was greeting every guest. To Xueqi's surprise, Aurelia was also wearing a very family-style emerald green court dress, accompanying Kale, that's to greet the guests. Seeing Xueqi come over, Aurelia raised her skirt and gave a ladylike bow. Her elegant temperament and dignified demeanor made it impossible for Xueqi to associate her with the wild elven ranger. Aurelia put on a sweet smile and said in her pleasant voice, "Thank you for coming, Xueqi. If you had been absent, all of Xueqi Salas would have been shamed." Xueqi, however, was sensitive to something. He looked at Aurelia's plump lips and bright appearance with lipstick, and unexpectedly found a trace of haze hidden in Aurelia's bright eyes. "Aurelia, what happened?" Xueqi said as he prepared to kiss her hand. Unexpectedly, Aurelia hugged him passionately, and her low voice sounded in his ear. "It's nothing. It's just like you said, big people always have a helpless need to put on a show. It's just that it's my turn today." A show. Xueqi understood a little. If the trolls hadn't attacked, or if they had come but returned without any success, then Aurelia would have been the shame of the elves, and would have been held accountable and investigated. But the truth was that the trolls had come and turned Xueqi Salas upside down. In order to whitewash peace and to restore the morale of the people, the elves needed a hero to divert the public's attention. Kale that's lost and won, and at most, his merits offset his demerits. But Aurelia was different. She had a close relationship with the Alliance, and secondly, facts had proven that she was right. Helping Aurelia become a hero would allow her to answer to the people and the Alliance at the same time. As for what she wanted to do later, she just had to keep a low profile. First, he had to deal with the current situation. Xueqi sighed deeply. Because there were many guests, Xueqi went in after a brief exchange with Aurelia. In the huge hall with a diameter of more than 1,000 meters, countless tables were set up. All kinds of sumptuous food and flowers filled the entire venue. When Xueqi entered, a large number of nobles had already arrived. They were holding goblets of wine and shuttling back and forth, not letting go of any opportunity to socialize. The atmosphere was so warm that it was hard to imagine that this was a tragic country that had just experienced the flames of war and had lost 1/3 of its citizens. The banquet began enthusiastically, but Xueqi noticed that Aurelia, one of the protagonists of the banquet, was clearly smiling but seemed to be crying. Chapter 406. This was a grand celebration banquet, and there were at least 1,000 guests present. However, there were not many people around Xueqi. Due to the fact that the army had been forced to retreat with a single flag, the local nobles who did not know the truth did not know who was responsible for the elves' ridiculous reversal of victory. Moreover, Xueqi's background was too great. He was the deputy commander of the Alliance, and all of his subordinates were kings. In theory, after Xueqi joined, the wizards would be provided to Xueqi. In the end, those who dared to show their faces in front of Xueqi were at least local lords or counselors. Xueqi dealt with them with a formal smile. However, Xueqi could instinctively feel the contempt in their bones. At first, one or two of them could be said to be misunderstandings, but towards the end, even Kale, that's who was by Xueqi's side, did not look too good. This was because more than one counselor could not help but use their spiritual force to test Xueqi. They seemed to want to know how Xueqi, with his weak strength as a Morningstar wizard, was able to become the deputy commander of the Alliance. One had to know that unless the elven wizard Chen Xing was of noble birth and had sufficient seniority, he would not even be able to become a counselor in the Silver Moon Council. Every person who made a move had their claws chopped off by Xueqi. It was like rock, paper, scissors. No matter what form of spiritual force you used, Xueqi could find a way to counter it in less than 1/10 of a second. Only then did they start to look seriously at Xueqi, who was too young from the perspective of humans and elves. Xueqi's focus was on Aurelia. With the help of the system elf's voice filter and amplification, Xueqi could hear what the elves around Aurelia were saying. "Niece Aurelia, I heard that you're going to serve that human lord. Are you going to get a title? Have you decided where your fief is? Sister Aurelia, are you going to marry the deputy commander of the Alliance? I'm so jealous of you." After listening for a while, Xueqi finally understood. This was a group of middle and low-level elven nobles, and they were somewhat related to the Windrunner family. He was different from those high and mighty upper-class nobles who flaunted themselves at their own cost. The nobles with fiefs in the southern part of the Long Song Forest suffered the most this time. The forest, which had not changed for thousands of years, was burned down, and a large number of people were killed. It seemed that the royal family and the parliament members, who had also suffered heavy losses, did not intend to support these poor people. The bitter days ahead were predictable. Xueqi was also situated in an awkward location. It occupied the northernmost part of the continent, and bordered the continent's most powerful human kingdom, Lordaeron, in the south. There was no room for expansion at all. If they couldn't survive, the hearts of the people would naturally change. They tried their luck and came to Illyria to find out what was going on. Aurelia was embarrassed. In fact, it was only a few days ago that she decided to follow Xueqi. She didn't know what position she would get after the so-called transfer, and whether she would get a title or not. Of course, she knew that Xueqi would not give them the cold shoulder. It was just that she was too busy these days, and that thing happened. Seeing Aurelia stunned, the expressions of these relatives were different. Some were curious, some were expectant, some were smirking, some were perfunctory, some were meaningful. Most of them were pessimistic. In the human world, there had never been a precedent of giving a title to a foreign race. They should be tricked into selling their lives for the humans, right? At this time, Xueqi came over. When he was still a dozen steps away, Xueqi said with a smile, "Oh, my countess, you are here."
Countess? This distinguished title belonged to Aurelia?
No matter what country, a person who could get to the rank of countess could never be called a small noble. At this time, a female elf asked half-jokingly, "Honorable Grand Duke Marcus, Aurelia is our Windrunner family's most beautiful and powerful ranger general. You can't look down on her."
Don't tell us that Aurelia can't even get a piece of land. How is that possible?
Aurelia is the most important person to me.
Xueqi did not hesitate.
In front of these long-eared elves, he took out a certificate of land. On it was an autograph of King Lang and the royal family's fire seal. Seeing that Xueqi's theoretical fief was so huge, all the elves were shocked.
Well, as you wish.
By the way, let me tell you, my Countess of East Elven Forest fief is here.
Xueqi gently held Aurelia's hand with his left hand and circled the map with his right.
This circle did not scare the elves to death. According to the map, this was already a forest of more than 1,000 square kilometers.
How was this a countess' fief? Calling it a duke's fief was too big.
Aurelia actually became a real duke of a human kingdom? This news was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. If they did not know that the old territories of Stormwind were still in a state of collapse, the elves would probably be in an uproar. However, this was also hope.
Xueqi came quietly and left quietly, leaving behind a group of even more eager Windrunner relatives.
Late at night, after the banquet ended, Xueqi returned to the state guest house, only to find Gavin Rad stammering and scampering away near the door of the room.
This could only mean one thing. Aurelia was here. The melodious sound of a harp came from the room. The ranger and the harp were the best combination.
God had blessed them with the most flexible fingers, and the superb fingering required to pluck the strings was as easy as eating and drinking.
However, it was different from any song that Xueqi had heard before.
The sound of the harp in the night was indeed melodious and delicate, but it seemed to be narrating an endless sad story.
"Aurelia, what happened?" Putting down the harp, Aurelia walked lightly to Xueqi and hugged Xueqi. Xueqi could clearly feel the rapidly expanding wetness on his shoulder.
"My parents died in battle."
It was a light sentence, but it was like a bolt from the blue to Xueqi.
According to Xueqi's memories of Aurelia's history, the one who should have died in battle was her youngest brother, Riras.
Now that Lilith was fine, Xueqi had confirmed it repeatedly before the banquet.
Who knew that it was her parents who had sacrificed themselves?
Didn't I repeatedly tell you to evacuate your relatives?
Xueqi's body trembled along with Aurelia's. Yes, they actually arrived at Silvermoon City a long time ago, but they went back without us knowing.
As a ranger lord,
Aurelia choked. I know that this is their responsibility and their honor, but I can't control myself. Tonight, I feel so uncomfortable that I'm going crazy, but I have no choice but to pretend to be the most dignified and noble. I have to put on a smile to face all the guests and deal with the distant relatives who can't live on anymore.
Chapter 407.
No wonder. No wonder. No wonder. Xueqi had heard Aurelia play the harp more than once. Most of the time, he could tell that Aurelia was singing about the beautiful life of the elves in Quell Thuraz, reminiscing about the peaceful days when they walked in the forest. Most of the time, he could tell that in order to protect this beauty and peace, Aurelia did not hesitate to risk her life. But now, the beautiful forest and her hometown were burned to the ground, and her parents died in battle. Xueqi had never experienced the sudden death of a loved one, and he could not understand how it felt to have a loved one who had accompanied him for thousands of years suddenly die. At this moment, Xueqi fell into a state of remorse and self-blame. He had never seen Aurelia's parents, and he did not imagine what kind of situation it would be after seeing them. But the Aurelia in front of him, drowned in tears and sorrow, really existed. Looking at that beautiful and sad face, Xueqi's self-blame in his heart grew heavier. If only I had done a few more steps, even if I had to tie them up, to ensure the safety of Aurelia's parents, then it would have been better. If only I had not allowed the tribe to attack Quell Salis, perhaps such a tragedy would not have happened. If only. After coming to this world, especially after becoming the Alliance's deputy commander, Xueqi had told himself more than once that he was a man of great things. For the future of himself and Azeroth, he could not be soft-hearted. It was with such a mentality that Xueqi could calmly look at the life and death of tens of thousands of people, or even hundreds of thousands of people. Because in Xueqi's heart, these people should have died in history. I did not kill these people, but I saved more people who should have died or died tragically. For example, Lang, who should have knelt long ago, or the fourth son of the Windrunner family, who should have been killed by Talon Gorfiend. In the end, Xueqi was still the young transmigrator. He was also often proud of his achievements. But now, when death really happened to the people around him, Xueqi found that he still couldn't take it. Xueqi's mind was in a mess. At this moment, a slender finger pressed against Xueqi's lips. I'm sorry, Xueqi. I've always been too demanding on you. I want you, who carries the future of the world's humans, elves and dwarves, to accompany me in my madness. I know you can't do it, but I still want you to extinguish the forest fire. Tonight, Aurelia was very weak. In front of Xueqi, she was no longer the smart and capable ranger general. She was not the Valkyrie on the battlefield. Instead, she was a weak woman who needed comfort. Her bright red lips parted slightly, and Xueqi unexpectedly kissed her. It was very, very soft to the touch, but it had a kind of inexperienced and clumsy feeling. However, Aurelia still responded positively to Xueqi. Xueqi suddenly felt that Aurelia's body was a little cold. He didn't know why, although he knew that he was taking advantage of her. Xueqi had a feeling that if he let go, he would regret it for the rest of his life. Slowly, Xueqi's hands began to explore. At this moment, Aurelia, whose vital part was touched, suddenly tensed up. Then, her eyes gradually brightened, and brightened again. It was a look of temporarily forgetting the pain and confusion in her eyes. She pursed her lips tightly, and then, a little abruptly, she smiled. Damn it, I'm really not like myself now. Although she was still crying, a sincere smile appeared on her face. My name is Aurelia Windrunner, the head of the Windrunner family, the heroine of the Troll War. If I cry like a weak person for comfort, and then some bad guy takes advantage of me, then I'm too weak. Xueqi, don't you always call me the Great Demon King in secret? Ah! Xueqi shook his head decisively, refusing to admit it. Then I'll give Xueqi Hero a chance to challenge the Great Demon King. Remember, the chance to challenge the Great Demon King doesn't come every day. If you fail this time, you'll have to wait 1,000 years for the next chance. Uft. 1,000 years? The future Azeroth was a dangerous world that could be destroyed 100 times a year. 1,000 years. Xueqi decided to do it. Seeing Xueqi's fighting spirit, Aurelia had a crying and laughing expression. Look at your small body. I don't need to bully you in close combat. I won't attack you, and I won't leave this room. As long as you catch me, the Great Demon King will be at your mercy. It's settled then. The battle began. At first, Aurelia was still thinking if she should go easy on him. In the end, she realized that she was thinking too much. If she couldn't attack the sorcerer's body, Xueqi had 10,000 ways to deal with her. The shameless Xueqi instantly froze the entire room. The ice kept increasing in size, quickly reducing the space in the room. Aurelia gave up after dodging a few times. She put her hands on her waist, looking like she was going to fight Xueqi head-on. As the most charming woman among the Windrunner sisters, her figure was also the most voluptuous. The Hyjal peaks on her chest perfectly displayed the beauty of the large arcs and the violence of the mass. However, when it reached the waist, it softly narrowed, and further down, it outlined another perfect arc. Aurelia crooked her finger at Xueqi. Suddenly, a system notification appeared. Aurelia Windrunner used taunt on you. Do you want to activate the boss battle mode? Xueqi randomly clicked a yes. The host has transformed and temporarily switched to a warrior. You used charge on Aurelia. You received 10 rage points. Aurelia is trying to use her strength to suppress you. You used armor break on Aurelia. Even though Xueqi had only played as a warrior for a few days before he transmigrated, he knew that a warrior could quickly establish aggro on a boss and make the boss only attack them. You used armor break on Aurelia. You destroyed her outer armor. You used armor break on Aurelia. You destroyed her chest armor. You used armor break on Aurelia. You destroyed her crotch armor. After 3 armor breaks, the warrior Xueqi realized that he couldn't use armor break anymore because there was no place to use armor break. At this time, Xueqi's attacks didn't seem to be going smoothly.
Aurelia smiled lightly. Your attack was parried by Aurelia. She used Counterstorm on you. Your armor value has already fallen to a dog. At this time, Xueqi shouted in his heart, Hey, System Elf, is there any way to increase my strength? I want to crush this woman. Host, you can try to use the magic circuit to control your body, but this will... Xueqi didn't hesitate for even half a second and did as he was told. Suddenly, Xueqi realized that his strength was completely above Aurelia's. Faced with Xueqi, who suddenly took the wrong medicine, Aurelia's expression changed greatly and she hurriedly tried to retreat. The boss Aurelia is trying to escape. Do you want to give chase? The System Elf asked considerately. Nonsense. Of course I want to give chase. However, I really haven't seen such a stupid boss. She actually exposed her back. The next moment, Xueqi temporarily changed his profession to thief. He directly locked Aurelia's waist and used the thief's godly skill, backstab, on Aurelia. The system notification came again. Congratulations, you have obtained the first blood of the great demon king Aurelia. Ah! Xueqi, you be *starred. Aurelia scolded. Xueqi used his temporarily obtained strength to completely suppress Aurelia. He directly used 998 consecutive backstab on Aurelia. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.